everyone. Tonight's City Council meeting, budget work session is now in session. Monday, January 17th, it is 5:15. Let's all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Very well. Note all are in attendance. Are there any reports from anyone tonight? Apparently there are none, and so we'll go right into the budget work session. And Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. I'm just going to give a kind of intro to it as we start to move into the budget process. And really, I want to start out to say thank you to your city team that really do a lot of work to put this budget together. Without their work and effort, you would not have the budget you have before you. So really thank Laura, Randy, Brad, Rachel, Chad, Greg, for really all their work that they put in this budget. They start, you may not realize, in early November in earnest on getting this together for their departmental reports to you, and then also then getting that to city administration by early December so we can put it together and get into the document before you this evening. I really do find the budget to be a really important document, and probably one of two main documents. I mean, the budget itself, to me, is the most significant financial management tool the city has, and it really outlays how we're going to spend funds, but then more importantly, how are we going to control kind of the municipal operations going forward in the next year. So this is an important document, and really once approved by the council, really kind of sets the path for all the departments within the organization to move forward. So we need to have a common vision as we move forward to this. And part of that, again, is that annual planning work session that we do every year that kind of lays out the priorities that we want as an organization and how do we move forward as a community. So just kind of highlight some of those. We had 5 initiatives moving forward. And these are in no particular order, but consider LED replacement at the airport and the runways. The total cost of that project is $955,000. We are presenting a budget that we're proposing to split that cost over 2 fiscal years, with $47,750 in this fiscal year. There would be a federal grant of $429,750 in fiscal year 23, and then we would have another local match of $47,750 in fiscal year 2024 with a similar federal grant match as we did this year. I would note that these are all general fund dollars. If you recall, our general fund is kind of our day-to-day operational fund for the city. The second initiative I'll point out is the sidewalk connecting Timberline to Pleasant Ridge, really kind of that creating the vibrant community. We have $15,000 in the current 2023 fiscal year proposed budget, and that is coming out of local option sales tax. Then we have $160,000 that would be in fiscal year 2024 for that project. Currently, that's undetermined. Likely would be local option sales tax would be what I would suggest. But in the budget that you have before you, that's still undetermined. I think part of it, we may need some revision on the scope of that project. And I think there's been some discussion on that. So we'll work through that as we go forward in the design phase of that. The third initiative was to update the 2013 comprehensive plan. We included $35,000 in fiscal year 2023 in the budget. Those are general fund dollars. Also to commit funds to repair and preserve the cemetery stone walls, fence, pillars, buildings, and monuments. We included $20,000 in fiscal year 2023. Those are coming out of general fund dollars in that particular case. And then create a 5 to 10 year plan for phases and implementation of the Carroll Corridor of Commerce 2.0 plan. We have shown in the capital improvement plan $100,000 in fiscal year 2024. So there's no dollars in the fiscal 2023 budget that's before you, but we have earmarked $100,000 for 2024 in the CIP. Also kind of positioning for the future, the planning session identified 17 previous goals that were to be continued, kind of under 4 broad areas. I'm not going to go over all 17 of those, but just a few of them I'd highlight. The Rec Center Improvement Project for fiscal year 2022, the current fiscal year we're in, this budget does show a re-estimated expense of $1,090,801. And we'll go through, and I should say all of these items, they'll get highlighted as each department goes through their individual budget. I'm kind of just going through the highlights right now to kind of get everyone thinking budget and some of those major items that are part of the budget. Another of those 17 was to become more proactive in economic development, especially filling downtown commercial space. We've been working in partnership with the CADC, with Retail Coach, and trying to do some promotion of in downtown and throughout the town, and also helping our existing merchants in their marketing. We've included $50,000 in the 2023 budget, that's local option sales tax dollars, to continue that work. And just for everyone's, just as a reminder, that was a 3-year commitment we made with CADC. This would be the last of that 3-year commitment. We also had a goal of implementing the housing study through recruiting of builders, consider creating an incentive program. We did include $60,000 in the fiscal year 2023 budget to kind of expand work in that area, and that was included in the general fund. And we'll highlight that again later as we go through the budget in detail by department. Another initiative was to review and revise the city's zoning and subdivision ordinance to help guide development and that development process. For fiscal year 2022, the current fiscal year, and we've engaged a contract. We haven't started the work, but we have a contract with Region 12 to update our subdivision ordinance. That was $2,500. So that work is in the current fiscal year. We'll begin that work here shortly with Region 12. And then the zoning component of that, we would say we'll wait till fiscal year 2024. If we move forward with a comprehensive plan, that's a good time then to follow after the comprehensive plan update is to go through your zoning ordinance and make those updates at that time. So it's kind of the plan and how we're laying it out in the budget. And then, you know, we also continue the road projects like Adams Street and other annual road construction. We've included those dollars in the fiscal year. So those are just some high level items as we looked putting this budget together. Each one of the initiatives, and we'll go through them, the departments, if it's their initiative, they'll kind of highlight it with the council as they go through the budget process that we have forward. Overall, the budget compared to fiscal year 2022, the current fiscal year as originally adopted was $19,115,412 million. Compared to fiscal year 2023, which was proposed, the proposed budget is $26,595,962. Now that is a change of $7,480,550. Now, a lot of that, and I should note, that's excluding transfers. So if you start looking at the budget sheets and say, hey, these numbers are maybe higher in some of the budget sheets, the numbers I've just provided are excluding transfers. So we're not kind of double counting revenues or double counting expenses. So if we're moving it from one fund to another, like for example, our tort liability, you know, we collect it under state law in that specific fund, and then we maybe expend it in a different fund. So that gets transferred mid-year to make that expenditure spend, but we don't double count both receiving it in one fund and then expending it in that fund to transfer it. And then that excludes transfers. And that's again across all funds, general, enterprise, utilities, all of our various funds. Now, I would say the big change is really attributable to the capital expenditures, and there's 3 major capital expenditures that are included in fiscal year 2023, $6.4 million for the rec center, $2 million for Adams Street reconstruction, and that's just in fiscal year 2023. And then the airport LED conversion project of $477,000. Now, again, 90% of that's going to be federal dollars, but it's still an expenditure, and that's why it's showing up as an expenditure there. Any questions so far? Now, the general fund, this is the one we really kind of watch very closely. Again, this is kind of our day-to-day operational fund for the city. We do see that our revenues are up $126,785, or 1.62%. Expenditures are up $764,022, or 8.9%. And again, a lot of that change in expenditures is related to one-time expenditures, are not that ongoing operational like personnel costs. And I'll show some charts here in a few seconds that will really highlight that a little bit. Based on the budget that we've presented from staff, we will end fiscal year 2023 with a general fund balance of $1.9 million, or right at 25%. And that's kind of our minimum recommended fund balance that we want to carry from year to year. Now, certainly the city could consider increasing the fund balance. And when it comes to debt issuances, having a higher fund balance can affect our credit rating. Having a better credit rating will result in lower interest rates potentially. And so that's something that we always watch. We have some other factors, especially with Moody's, that really affect our ability to lower that credit rating. Really, with the size of our tax base is really the number one issue that we really cannot control compared to other communities, and how Moody's rates us. I mean, we need more people and property value to really impact that rating from Moody's. Any questions with that? One thing that I wanted to break down and show is kind of that expenditures by functional class. And what I mean by functional class, personnel services, services and commodities, and capital outlay. Now, this is across all funds in this case. You can see personnel services were actually declining by 1.7%. Now, one of the big reasons, big drivers for that is not that wages aren't going up, but fiscal year 2022, we had 27 pay cycles. And because we run on a cash basis, when we write the check, that's when we accrue it on our books instead of accrual, where you account it in a specific fiscal year. And so because of that extra pay cycle, going into this year, it did make the budgeting from the personnel side a little bit easier. Services and commodities, we are seeing some increases in like our natural gas costs. We have included additional expenditures there. Some of our commodity costs that we incur, we've seen some increases there. But then we do have some one-time purchases in there, and then capital outlay again. A lot of that's again one-time purchases, so that can fluctuate from year to year. And again, your major capital projects are in that. Debt service, you'll see a big jump. Again, that's taking on some of those additional projects, both the Adams Street project and then the rec center project is what's driving that change. So that then breaks down your total differences between the original fiscal year 2022 budget and the proposed fiscal year 2023 budget. Any questions on that?
Mike, the debt service includes both the loss bonds as well as GO bonds.
Yep. So the budget, as we're presenting in the 2023 budget, does include the rec center project, does include the Adams Street project. So everything we talk about today is including all those. So if projects come off or the scope of those projects change, that would have a material impact to these numbers.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Drilling down, kind of again looking at these functional classes within the general fund itself. Again, you can see personnel services again has that decline of 2.8%. Services and commodities are up a little bit, and our capital outlay is almost double. But again, those are one-time kind of expenditures in that area and do fluctuate from year to year depending on what's happening. Questions on that? Personnel and kind of wages, I would say there's no full-time position, no new full-time positions proposed in fiscal year 2023. Police and Public Works Union, this is their final year of the collective bargaining going to fiscal year 2023. July 1, 2022, that agreements, both those agreements included a 3% increase. What I would tell you in particular with police, that is on new collective bargaining agreements, is on the low side. We're seeing communities that have 5, 6, 7% increases for next year in the law enforcement area in particular. And then there's pressure even in the public works or general unions of just what's happening with wages. But for fiscal year 2023, 3% is in our collective bargaining, so that is what's being presented to council. The budget also includes 3% for non-union positions. That's been the typical pattern for the city, is to follow what the unions receive for the non-union wages. Any questions with that? This is a chart that shows the comparison between the wages between fiscal year 2022 and 2023 and the change. Now, fiscal year 2022 in this chart shows 27 pay cycles. That's what we had and what is in the proposed budget. So you can see for the most part, it's almost flat. A big increase in the road use tax fund. That's really attributable to, we had a vacancy in that department that we have had for over a year now. And so as we re-estimated and dropped that, certainly it kind of looks like a new position, but it's been a budgeted position. We just have not had it filled. And just really, we do need that position filled just for like street maintenance and snow removal operations in our public works department. One of the things that I wanted to show and what this table shows is we took the fiscal year 2022 numbers and really said, what if it was only a 26 pay period year versus the 27 that we had? What the real true impact of the wage increases are. And so you can see this is how that breaks down. Overall, most departments would have been, most funds would have been about 3.5%, almost 4% increase. Road use tax was up 12.3%. And again, that's attributable to in fiscal year 2022, we had a 3% increase in wages. Additionally, if you were on a different step, if you're a newer employee and you're going through our step process, you would see a 4% increase on top of the 3% wage increase. So that's how you end up with a little bit higher than a 3% increase when you're kind of comparing similar pay periods to similar pay period years. Any questions on that information?
Yeah, I just calculated that out. So the difference on your chart that you did on the second part is $175,437. So we're going to have that much of an increase in payroll is what we're looking at.
Say that number again.
$175,437.
Yep. So
how much our payroll is going to increase next year.
Yep. If you're looking at a true, like a 26 to 26.
Yeah, I'm
yes,
glad you did that because
absolutely.
it's a true statement.
Yep.
Alrighty.
Good question. Any other questions?
And Mike, that only accounted for wages, right? We didn't account for it, even though wages go up, then there's also the increase for the employee benefits that go along with it.
Yeah,
right?
this is just wages, wage data. Yep.
What usually is that percentage?
Well, it varies on.
FICA,
Levies.
or municipal fire and police.
So you're looking probably 6%.
FICA 7.65%. IPERS, the employees that are there, that's 9.44%, and municipal fire and police is 25%.
Down, right?
Ish. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's
But-
around 25%.
Yeah, but again, even though you have those different percentages, if your wages increase 3%, your pension, FICA, Medicare is going to still kind of have that same 3% overall increase. It doesn't mean you just kind of, it's a bigger number. I mean, it's, yeah, but this is just wage increases.
What do you mean by bigger number? I mean, we've got to have that money.
Correct. And we do in the budget, we've accounted
Right.
for those dollars.
But what, so it's 175,000 in wages. What is it for the benefits?
On the spot, I can't calculate that, but it,
25,000 or any idea?
Sorry.
Well, we got to kind of know.
off the cuff, I would say about probably another 20 to 30,000.
Okay, that's close enough for me.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Thank you.
Any other question on wages in particular? One thing we always talk about is our health insurance costs. It's a huge cost for us. It's also one of those areas that we do really, really, really well in at the city of Carroll. When I talk to my counterparts and what they're paying for health insurance, it is a lot higher. I mean, we're talking double what we're paying here in the city of Carroll. So we've had a very healthy workforce, and we've had a really good track record with our employees. So this is one of those areas that we don't know today what our rate increase will be for health insurance. It will be a few months before we get that. After our budget's done, it's always the scary part of the budget. But it's one of those areas that we, knock on wood, we're doing well, but we're probably at some point going to face a large increase, and it could be 20 or 30% increase. I came from a county that prior to me being there, they've seen a 17, 34, 34, 17 over a 4-year period. And so it can have a drastic impact to our budget. What we do in just high level is we buy a catastrophic health insurance plan from Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's a $7,000 deductible, $14,000 maximum out of pocket, and then $14,000 family. The maximum out of pocket is $7,900 per individual, $15,800 for family. So it doesn't provide great coverage. We then, as a city, fund a health reimbursement account. So it's also known as a health reimbursement arrangement in some circles. We then buy down those costs for our employees to a $500 deductible, $1,000 family deductible, $1,000 maximum out of pocket, $2,000 family maximum out of pocket. And so we're considered what's called partially self-funded from that perspective. And we are then able to, we charge a premium, work with our health insurance provider that really helps us set the rates. Then we pay Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield for those premiums, and then we set dollars aside to pay for those costs as employees submit the bills. It really does work well, and that's really positioned us both to have, I think, lower health insurance rates over the long term, but also if we would face a catastrophic year where we'd see big increases, we have reserves that we can buy down that big increase probably the first year to help cushion us as we move into that higher rate. We are projecting at the end of fiscal year 2023, we'll have $1,013,238 in our reserves for health insurance premiums. Now remember, our employees pay 20% of the health insurance cost. We as a city pay 80%. So that is not just city dollars, that's employee dollars also going forward. The budget as presented does include, we're anticipating a 15% increase in our health insurance costs with the Blue Cross Blue Shield. And then we also are anticipating a 10% increase in our COBRA rate. And just, we use the COBRA rate is what we as a city then fund and charge both the departments and our employees for our health insurance, and what we then put in reserves to pay those, both the Wellmark Blue Cross Blue Shield premiums and then our HRA costs as we go forward. Any questions on that? I know it's kind of confusing, but it really does work in the city's advantage overall.
Well, before you get off that, just to explain the terminology, if you've never heard about COBRA, what COBRA is. COBRA rate, that word to help us, or that's the word we use when we say, or when we set our rate for what the plan would actually cost if we went to Wellmark and bought a $500 deductible plan, the $1,000 maximum out of pocket. It's our best guess of what Wellmark would charge us for that. But instead of us paying all that money to Wellmark, we buy that higher deductible plan, pay them a part of it, use some of those savings to set aside into this other area, this other savings account we call our fund, so that we can then pay the buy down amount. And then hopefully overall that we're saving money overall, that not everybody is going to be asking for the full amount to get down to that $500. That kind of explains maybe a little bit better.
But if you had a big sickness that came through town, you'd eat up that million.
You could, you definitely could.
And there's some liability. I mean, and we can get into a whole discussion about, we just adopted about a year ago now, a policy on how much we want in reserve and different component functions of that reserve. Part of it is we have a maximum liability. If everyone is on a bus with their family members and it gets in a car accident and we're subject to $14,000 per family that we basically have to buy down to, we'd have to buy down to $12,000. That would be our liability per family. We have the reserves to do that. Now, if we have that big of a catastrophic event, we're also probably looking at a big premium increase the next year from Blue Cross Blue Shield. So we have some dollars set aside to kind of withstand that increase and kind of transition into a higher premium. So there's a lot of thought and science behind how we have this set up and why we have it set up, and it's really worked very well for the city. The other comment I would make before we move on, this year we have made some changes that started last year. We're kind of phasing in how we do some of our reimbursements to our employees, and in particular with our pharmacy benefit and with our office co-pays. We used to buy it down and would pay some dollars. Well, now with the start of this fiscal year in July 1 of 2022, the city's no longer through the HRA going to reimburse for pharmacy costs and office co-pays. Now, the plan we buy from Blue Cross Blue Shield does have office co-pays, so it's not like you have a deductible you have to meet. If you go in, I think it's $25 for a family doctor and $50 for a specialty office visit through the plan we buy through Blue Cross Blue Shield. We were buying that down, so we'll no longer expend that through the HRA, and so that's one change that's been that we've been moving through. Now, when we did our collective bargaining changes previously with Public Works in particular, with the changes that the state made in 2017 with collective bargaining, health insurance was taken out as something you could bargain for. So we took that out of our contract. And with police union, they could still negotiate health insurance. We, through negotiations and concessions between both parties, they agreed starting in 2019, July 1 of 2019, that the council then could make the plan design decisions for the health insurance overall. We've been very cautious not to make a lot of changes because, again, our rates are really low and competitive. I haven't seen anyone that pays the rates we do here at the city of Carroll.
How long has this fund been going on?
Good question. It's been going on for, I believe, 12 years now. I can get you the exact date. We have, about a year ago, we made some decisions and had some discussions about how are we going to manage this? We don't want to see this fund just keep growing. And so we put some policies in place that, in particular, once we hit certain benchmarks, we will do what's called a premium holiday. And so at that point, we still pay the Wellmark bill, we still pay the HRA bills as they come in, but we don't charge both the employee and the employer health insurance in that particular month. And so when that happens, that's like an 8% reduction in our health insurance costs right when that happens. The reason it's advisable kind of to take that approach is instead of just saying, we're going to lower our health insurance premiums by 5%, well, then I guarantee you're going to have a bad year and you're going to have to raise them 10%, plus you're going to have to make up that 5%, leave the health insurance rates where they need to be, where they should be. And then if you do have excess reserves, then we just we don't charge premiums in one particular month. So we've done that once now since we put this policy in. We looked at it to see if we could have done one by the end of this current fiscal year. We're not quite there yet. If we're able to trigger one before the end of this fiscal year, we'll do that. Great question, because you look at $1 million and you think that's a lot, but it's a big cost and a big unknown for the city as we go forward. Any questions? So we'll transition to debt service. And again, just high level items here. Fiscal year 2023 represents the last debt payments for the outdoor aquatic center. We need to have a bond burning party, I think, when we get there. Or maybe we just sink it in the water and get it all wet. I don't know. Fiscal year 2024 will also be the last year of the cemetery building, 3rd Street debt payments. We have 2 other debts that are general obligation debt arena. That's the Fire Truck Street improvement. That was a 2020 debt in 2029. Library City Hall was a 2018 original issuance. We refunded it or refinanced it in 2021. That's a payoff in 2033. So that's kind of our outstanding geo debts that are out there. The proposed budget does include 2 big debt issuances, one for the Adams Street reconstruction and rec center. That debt issuance is $3,230,000. That would be projected to be paid off in 2031. The rec center gym locker room renovation, that's a $5.74 million. That would be projected to be paid off in 2041. We are also looking out, and I'll show you some figures, but projecting to do a street improvement project every 3 years. We look to do one in 2026, 2029, 2032, and so on. With all of that in consideration, our long-term plans to keep the debt service levy at or below $1.41, and that was kind of the direction that we got about a year ago from the council of what they wanted to work towards, and the budget as presented does do that.
Mike, can I ask a quick question before you move on?
Yeah.
First dumb question of the night is the Adams Street reconstruction / rec center. I'd like you to explain that when we've got another rec center right below it.
Correct.
And then the second one is it shows 3.2 million, and we've been projecting or estimating about between 4 and 4.5 million.
Yeah.
So can you explain those?
Good question. So first, I'll start with the rec center. The plan that was adopted by the council about a year ago was to expend some dollars towards the Adams Street, and then additionally $700,000 for the rec center through a geo bond. And part of the reason is just the cost of issuance. That interest rate through a geo bond issuance is a lower interest rate, but certainly the council could decide to do all of it out of lost geo issuance, or they could go forward with what they kind of laid out before. So that's the $700. So there's $700,000 in the Adams Street reconstruction / rec center project. And if you hear me talk about scenario D, and I kind of refer to it here in a second, that's what scenario D laid out.
Okay.
Now, to your second part of your question of, why is this lower? Well, there's other funding sources for the Adams Street project in addition to
Road use
tax,
right,
and some other sources. So
okay.
That would explain that difference.
Okay. And so we wouldn't plan, at least the budget isn't prepared to bond for the whole
We
thing.
would not bond for the entire
Okay.
amount.
I had that on my list of questions, and forgive me if I ask you that again when we meet
No.
on Wednesdays, but
It's and there's
I
lots
saw that in the budget and I just, I wondered. So
Yeah.
thank you.
Good question. Anything else on that component of debt service? One thing I want to show you, and this is kind of the latest numbers we could come up with. So at the beginning of fiscal year 2022, this is the geo debt issuance of all of our peer communities that we have. And this is in order of the percentage of their geo debt limit that they're allowed under Iowa Constitution to have. And you can see here, Carroll is the second lowest at 15.75%. Pella is lower at 2.76%. Now, what I would note is if you start looking at revenue debt, which doesn't count against your constitutional debt limit. We actually, as in terms of percentage, is the lowest of all of them. Pella actually jumps to ninth at $33.9 million. We're actually with revenue debt, we're at $10.4 million. And so overall, we really do have low debt when you consider all of our peers and how we compare to them. Now, I think that then translates into maybe some of the struggles we've had in streets in particular. If you're not, street debt is really it's not the only way you can fund street reconstruction, but it's the best way to fund it. And that's why I think you see other communities have a higher debt level because they're doing those street and re-improvements projects. This gets a little bit confusing, but this kind of explain this. But so this is by fiscal year, actual property valuation. If you said, you know what, we're not going to issue any new debt for nothing, no streets, no other projects, we do have a scenario where we would start running out of debt. Now the yellow is kind of past fiscal years. We can't impact those. Now the gray down here with some of the work that PFM has done for us, they're not projecting any, they're only showing so many years of street improvement projects, and we're planning to do one every 3 years. So we should have one in fiscal year 2031. That's why I just kind of grade that section out to kind of show, well, these numbers show a decline, but in reality, we're going to take on probably more debt so we can keep doing those street improvement projects. But you can see even with this scenario D that I talked about, this is your rec center project and your Adams Street project, we'd be at 30.28%, actually 32.91 at fiscal year 2022, based on when we could possibly issue all that debt. That's the high end. Now, if we said we're only going to do roads, we're not going to do any rec center, you can see we're at 20%. Now you go back to that other table, we're still even at 30%. We're not even half. We're still in the lower half of the amount of debt that's outstanding of our peer cities. So debt is just one way we pay for projects. And one of the reasons why governments and cities put on debt is it's also about trying to place the burden of the project on the user that's receiving the benefit of that project. So if we were going to redo my road and we're going to do that in 20 years, and I sell my house 19 years from now, and I've been paying for that, my property taxes to do that road, I don't get any benefit of that new road as a user because you haven't done my road and I've been paying that property taxes. Versus with debt, debt comes online, we're paying the property taxes for that road project. So it's one of the reasons why we do debt issuance. Another reason, especially in the current environment with interest rates as low as they are, if we wait and we save up to do a project, the cost of construction, we've been constantly seeing inflationary costs for the last 20 years for construction projects, about 5% a year on average. And so if you're trying to save up for that project, you want to pay 5% interest or 1%, or you want to pay 1% interest or 5% inflation every year. You can't ever catch up. So it's another reason why in this particular environment, debt makes sense. Any questions on kind of debt and what we're looking for, have laid out in the budget? Other issues to highlight, backfill with last legislative session, they're phasing out backfill over 5 years. So you can see how it is phasing out for us over the next 5 years. We do anticipate that in the current fiscal year. One nice component is with the change with the comm center, that does offset part of this backfill issue, but certainly it's one area that as we go forward, we're gonna have to be cautious about. Overall, proposed property tax collections for the city compared to fiscal year 2022 are up 193,000 or 3.09%. I think what most people are really concerned about is their property tax bill, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But once you set what your needs are through property tax collection. Then you start looking at what is your taxable value, and then how does that translate into a levy rate. Now, one issue, and I'm showing here the past 10 years, and it may be hard to read, but for fiscal year 2023, our total taxable value is going down 1.54%. Now, our assessed value actually went up, but with the residential rollback and what that did, we're actually seeing a decline in our property tax, in the property values, the taxable property values. And so that's declined. So even if we kept like the levy rate flat, we would see a decline in real dollars coming in because of that change. And so with that, showing the levy rate for proposed fiscal year 2023, the budget as presented is $12.14382 dollars per thousand of value. So it's up. Now, we're going to talk about what that does, what that impact looks like to a property taxpayer here in a second.
Can you go back to the backfill? One more, right there. So that's we're going to get 163,000 from backfill.
Correct.
What was it before they started knocking it down?
About 200,000. Good question. So as we look at consolidated levy, so consolidated levy is all the taxing entities together, what their levy rate is. Now, what this chart does, and there's a similar chart in your budget book, but we took and said, okay, what would be our consolidated rate, assuming all other taxing authorities remain the same. They obviously may change the levy rates up or down. What would that look like, assuming all the other, compared to the other jurisdictions in fiscal year 2022? And you'd still see, if everyone stays the same and we're going up, we still would be the lowest consolidated rate out there. Now, when you look at city-only property taxes, you can see Carroll, we would go over Lamar's, but we still remain in the bottom half of overall levy rates compared to our peers. So it would be a change of one position in regards. Now, that's assuming everyone else's levy stays the same and we're the only ones changing. I would assume with the rollback, all the other jurisdictions are going to be facing that too. There'll probably be some changes in that levy rate. The consolidated rate with the backfill change, especially on the county side and how mental health is going, there could be a wild change within the county levy rate statewide. So we're not going to know what any of those levy rates are going to be until after everyone certifies their budgets.
How will that affect with property values assessments going on now, or assessor going around now? How will that affect that in the future?
Yeah, I'm going to go back a few slides. So if you look in property values, fiscal year 14, we were at $436 million of taxable value. In 15, it went up to 509 million. There was an increase of 16%. Again, we need, there's values and there's levy rate. In the end of the day, we need to translate that to real dollars. We need to operate. Well, if we would have kept the levy rate flat there, we would have received more dollars than what we needed. So if you look at the levy rate in 14, it was $12.90. In 15, it went to $11.98. We didn't need, with the values going up, we lowered the levy rate. So those are decisions councils are going to have to make. Now, those revaluations won't come on for 2 years. Am I right, Laura? It'll be fiscal year 25.
Yeah.
So those will be decisions we'll have to make later. They're not impactful to this fiscal year 2023. Great question, though. Anything else on that? So in the end of the day, it comes down to this. What is the impact to the property taxpayer? And this may get hard to wrap your head around, to think we're asking for 3% more dollars in fiscal year 2023 for the average homeowner, they're going to see no change in their property tax bill. What we, just kind of randomly looking about 20, 30 properties around town, generally property values stayed the same from what would be fiscal year budget 2022 to fiscal year 2023. I can tell you out of the council, only one person's property values went up. Mayor's went up. Thank you. We appreciate that.
You're more than welcome.
But everyone else's property value between fiscal year 2022 and 2023 remained flat. And in the years past, we've always kind of shown this chart and said, okay, we knew there was an increase. We would show that increase, but really for most property taxpayers, there's no increase in their assessed home value. So if you go through this, a $500,000 house with the rollback, what they're going to get taxed on compared to last fiscal year goes from $81,195 compared to last year of $84,000. So you're getting taxed on less dollars right out of the get-go. You have your homestead credit. So in fiscal year 2023, the taxable valuation is $76,000 per thousand, and then our tax rate is 12.14382. So your tax bill is going to be $927.12, or a decrease of $2.30, or overall a 0.23% reduction. Now that's on the homeowner side. Now I'm going to show you last year, our levy rate went up a little bit. It was almost a 3% increase. Now the other thing that happened is the rollback went up last year. And so that was part of the driver, because last year our increase, I believe, was off the top of my head, was 1.97% in dollar collections, but then residential paid 3% increase. So those rollbacks and the state formulas, we don't have any control over the rollbacks. That's all done at the state level. Do play a lot into that property tax bill. As we look at commercial, so a $1 million commercial building, this year, the rollback doesn't change. It's always 90% for commercial properties. So $900,000 again per thousand, it's going to go to $10,929.44. This is an increase of $440. So that's where you're seeing overall then that compiled rate of just over 3% in property tax collections. Residential is going down, commercial going up. And you look at the year before, your residential, if you remember, last year went up 3.4%. Last year, commercial went up 0.45%. So the rollbacks in the long game do kind of equalize between the property tax collections or classifications, but that's just how it works out this year. Any questions on that? I just have a few more slides. Some of this we'll go through quickly. This is a chart that we show in the book, and it really shows what the average home in Carroll compared to others. So the blue lines, these are all of our peer cities. The blue charts show the average home value according to the county assessor in each of these counties, and what that tax bill would be for the average home. So in Carroll, our average is $140,620, and consolidated rate, they pay $1,966.05 in property taxes. This compares to Denison, that has a home value $35,000 less. They pay more in property taxes. They pay $2,189 or $233 more in property taxes. And again, that's where the levy rate starts to make a difference. They have a really high levy rate. So even though their home values are less, because that levy rate's so much higher, they still pay more property taxes. And I think, again, what I like about this chart is when you see a big disparity between the red and blue, if that red line is above the blue bar, you know you're a high property tax community. When the red bar is lower than the blue bar, you are a lower property tax community. So this is not in your budget book, but this shows you then what that impact is. Now we did account for the rollback because there's a change, but you can see there's pretty much no change to the property taxpayer and residential. Same thing with this chart. This is city only property taxes. And again, this $140,000 home is the average value home according to the Carroll County auditor or assessor. They pay $867.62 in city property taxes. This compares to Denison of $1,027.63 or $160 less in fiscal year 2022. And again, when you look at all the charts across, there's only 4 bars that the average home pays less in property taxes in the city of Carroll. So I think that really speaks volume, and they have less value than what you see in the city of Carroll. And then you can see again, here's adding what the proposed levy does. And again, it's a few dollar change in that. I'm going to go through this. I was concerned about future concerns. My biggest concern every year is the legislature, and it doesn't seem like they fail, and they're certainly not failing us this year. We know the backfill is being phased out. We knew that from the last legislative year. It's what we have to live with, and really, and I'm going to say this, and I know this is me on YouTube. I don't care. I've been in Iowa, I've been in Minnesota. I've been doing this for 20 years. The legislature seems like they like to attack cities for whatever reason, counties too. And I think maybe it's some of the budget pressures they're on. For whatever reason, it just seems like they when they have an issue or they want to change, it trickles down to cities. One of the things we know is there's a lot of discussion about comprehensive tax reform in Iowa, and that's out there. And all of you, do you get the legislative link now? I'm looking more at the new ones from the Iowa League of Cities. So one of the things I'm going to highlight that was talked about a little bit, and as you may or may not know as council, I serve on the Iowa League of Cities legislative committee. This is my second year doing that. And so we have weekly calls, and we talked about this in great length this morning. But one of the discussions is local option sales tax. And this is directly out of the league, but they're seeing, while there's a lot of conversation on tax reform, Senator Dawson, he's the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, made it clear that the Senate proposal will trigger what's called I will. And so I will was a constitutional amendment that was done in 2010, passed by the voters by 63% approval, that dedicates 3/8% of sales tax towards the purpose of protecting and enhancing water quality, the natural areas of the state, including parks, trails, fish, and wildlife habitat, and conserving agricultural soils in the state. So if you're going to do something that triggers that, the only time that triggers is if you see an increase in state sales taxes. Since there has been since the 6% state sales tax, we have a 1% additional, so that's the 7% total that's charging Carroll. But the overall 6% statewide general sales tax hasn't changed in like 2 decades. That provision's not been triggered. So there's only 2 ways to trigger it. One, you have to increase the state of Iowa sales tax. A tax increase is probably not very palatable, and that's a cautionary note. What the league is really concerned about is if they would remove local option sales tax. They think that is going to be a big legislative initiative this year, and then make it a state-wide sales tax. Those would be dollars that cities and counties statewide would lose. This is significant on governments in Iowa. I can't tell you how, and I'm going to talk about the impacts, what we're looking at in the city of Carroll if this would happen, but this is a significant impact.
Isn't that what they did with the ISL, or not the ISL, but the
actually,
couple? One of those. There used to be a 1% sales tax.
yeah, there used to be a
schools.
5% sales tax
Now
on
it's
1%
statewide.
school and 1% city. And all the schools joined that 1% for the sales tax. So they just made it, everybody. So they
Right.
collect 6 and then give 1 cent to the
And that was
city.
because some districts were, some districts weren't. And
Everybody-
they ended up just going,
Yeah, it started quite a few years ago.
And now
but
they
then
divvy it
At
up.
the end, everybody was doing it for 10 years, so the legislatures just put it permanent.
One of the other issues with the school one in particular, and there was actually a Iowa Supreme Court case over it. Actually, a good friend of mine from college was the lead attorney on it, so it's a fun conversation with him. There was a disparity between the schools that were not in property or retail rich communities, and so they weren't getting as much dollars. Well, there's a provision in the Iowa Constitution that says every school district has to receive equal funding. And so there was a challenge, and basically it prevailed. And the solution was to go to a statewide sales tax, and it gets distributed on a per pupil versus like our local option sales tax. It's countywide. We're actually in a retail rich community. When you look at per capita, Carroll County is in the top 20 counties in the state for receiving sales tax or sales. So, we're a huge benefactor from that perspective versus if we went to a statewide distribution.
It's called the equalization law.
Yeah.
So every student in the state of Iowa gets so many dollars based on what the whole state generates. So you take like the Jordan Creek area, they're going to generate a ton of money for their school district. Well, in the southern tiers, they don't generate hardly anything. So make it an equal education across the state. They give so many dollars per student.
That's what I understood it too.
Yep, sorry, Mark.
Oh, go ahead, Carol,
No,
please.
Vinny, you go ahead and finish.
No,
I
I'm just,
just thought of something real quick. Mike or Laura, do you know, Carroll generates like what, 70% of the total local
Roughly
lost
that, I don't know.
revenue?
Yep.
But then it gets dispersed to the smaller towns where they have actually voted yes for the tax. So
We
we
generate
end up with, we generate 70% and we keep
About 50%.
50, okay. So it's a boon to all the small towns.
But they also come to Carroll to
But-
shop too. So
When you brought up the legality, I was also thinking of this, that is the league looking into, since people actually vote, it's a democratic process, they vote to tax themselves.
Correct.
And the cap is 1 cent. And so I wonder if it's even constitutional, given the process that we go through. Is anybody, do you know?
And I can have those conversations.
I
with
don't
Lee.
know.
I think the view is, the legislature did it in statute. The legislature can change it in statute. And there's a lot of issues that we have to think about. It's something we're just gonna have to watch.
Right.
We always
right.
watch the legislature, and as you can see here, I mean, this is how we've been using local option sales tax since 2004. I mean, there's $6.3 million that went right to property tax reduction.
Right.
We sent 25% of our local option sales tax dollars to debt service payments. And, so that is the purest form of property tax reduction. And then you just look at the fire station, aquatic center, road projects, projects in our parks. We've spent $4.9 million on just road infrastructure projects. Somehow we'd have to make those dollars up. And so when we look at the impact for fiscal year 2023, if we lost local option sales tax on 7/1 of 2022, we'd have to raise our levy to make those debt payments by 96 cents right off the get-go. Now,
that's to break even.
what?
That's just to break even on your budget.
That's just to break even on debt service. And you have to do that. You're constitutionally required to pay your debt payments. And then just the impact of other projects that we have funded in the budget. Now, it's unlikely the legislature will do something that affects fiscal year 2023. They've, at least in the past, have always been very cautious of impacting budgets that are approved by cities, but it's something we have to be cautious of. And we're always watchful of. We're working on, I've had some conversations with some administrators in the area. We're working to set up a meeting with our legislators locally to talk about the impacts. Certainly we'll invite mayor and a couple council members to attend some of that, because I think it's impactful. Something to watch.
I'm going to a League of City meetings Thursday night. I'll bring it up there.
Yeah.
This just came out today.
Last Wednesday is when Senator Dawson made the comment, and then It came out, the League of Cities legislative update on Friday. Yeah. Inflationary pressures, this was in the book. I kind of blew it up here a little bit. Using July 1 of 2016 as kind of the baseline, what this chart shows is different inflationary indicators that are out there, including the CPI Midwest, that's the Consumer Price Index, Municipal Cost Index, Producer Price Index, and the Iowa DOT price trend for highway construction costs. And so you can see where inflation's going. This also includes this blue here. This is the city general fund expenses. This orange one is city property tax asking what we're collecting. And you can see stuff is well above inflationary when you go back and look just the last 5 years of what's happened in comparison. Now, these last dots here, so this is the highway construction index, this is the producer price index, this is the municipal cost index, and this gray one is the CPI Midwest. Those are November 1 of 2021. When I put this together, that was the latest that was available. I would note that the CPI keeps going up, going back from November. In my memo, I think I said it was 7.3%. For December, looking back last year, is 7.5%. So it is now, I always argue the CPI is not always a great indicator for city budgets. We don't buy food, we buy some gas for transportation costs, but it's just different than a family budget. We don't have housing costs. It's just a different set of dollars where, construction, buying steel for road constructions. I mean, those are just different entities. Buying salt for snow removal, buying chlorine for our pool. It's just a different inflationary impact. And so you can see what that, where we're at as a city compared to some of those indices. Questions on that? Employee compensation, we talked about that. Most of our 40 of our 65 full-time employees are in unions. We know this is the last year of those. 3% are increase. 3% are increase for non-unions, also in the proposed budget. I would note that we do include $60,000 to complete a classification compensation study prior to going into negotiations. We think that's important. I know council's talked about that in years past of planning to do that work going into negotiations. And I think in light of the inflationary costs and what we're seeing out in the marketplace, both locally in both the private sector and the public sector, and then also statewide of what our competition is, I think it's even more important to do that this year. ARPA funds, or the American Rescue Plan Act, included coronavirus state and local fiscal recovery funds. The city of Carroll received $1.4 million. We received half in August. We received the other half in August of 2022. I would note in January 6th, the Department of Treasury did release their final rules. One of those rules was cities or counties can actually say up to $10 million without any justification was actually revenue loss. And by making that change, by that declaration, we can take those funds and spend them on any governmental purpose without any other restrictions. So we don't have to follow that has to be sanitary sewer, water, broadband, or any of the other restrictions that the ARPA funds came with. So a lot of flexibility. I still, one of the things when we first talked about ARPA funds and doing this, I've always took the approach of let's be cautious, let's move slowly through it. We do not need to spend those funds we don't need to obligate them until December 31st of 2024. So we have lots of time. We don't have to spend them until December 31st of 2026. Now, what the ARPA funds cannot go for, there's a couple different things. You can't spend them towards pension obligations, but you cannot use those funds to lower taxes. So somehow you have to show that you're expending those dollars by not offsetting other expenditures that you have had in your budget or you had planned to do in your budget.
So basically, you can spend them how you want. It just can't be in your budget.
or they have to be in your
We've got budgeted
budget.
currently, we can't spend anything of that money on those projects.
Correct. Yep, but you can spend them for example, we have 15 police officers, just looking at where we're at. We're gonna spend half the dollars on police this year and the other half next year on police, while you're offsetting an ongoing cost. That would be a property tax reduction. So that's an ongoing obligation. You can't spend it towards that. That's my read of the rules.
So how do you spend it if you don't budget it into something? You just randomly say, hey, I want to spend it on this.
Well, I mean, it would be, what they really want you to do is spend it on infrastructure. Ultimately is what they want to do. So I think you look at road improvement projects would be one thing. I know I've talked with Chief Burke. I know a couple communities are doing some pilot projects with it, in police in particular, and doing mental health crisis counselors. Chief can talk about it, but it's our high drivers are our mental health cases. And so can we offset that? And so we don't have officer time hung up in that. It doesn't have to go towards that, but I think it is one of those opportunities. I think you really, let's not be in a hurry. Let's be logical. These are dollars that can make a difference in the community. How do you want to make that difference? If it's road improvements, great. I think that makes a difference. If it's something else, great. If it makes a difference, let's try to make it the most impact.
Mike, you mind just, I don't mean to belabor it, but you'd still budget for those. It'd be an in and an out,
Budget,
wouldn't it?
yes. You have to
But
budget
we
for
would
it.
still figure that into a
Correct.
budget.
Yeah, it would get figured
So
in
it
a
would
budget.
get budgeted,
Well, that's what I'm trying to understand.
but it would show a revenue in and expenditure out.
You just can't offset a budget that you normally would have, if that makes sense.
Basically ongoing expenses.
Yes.
How about capital improvements?
Yes, you can use it towards capital improvements.
So we could do things that water, copper, nutrients.
Yep.
And rather than take it out of their reserves or their budget, we could.
Now, and one aspect I would always say is it's a philosophy thing. Water and sewer, I think with the fund balances and kind of projecting out what those costs will be, we believe, we're going to have to issue debt to do those projects, but then the ongoing user fees will pay for that without hopefully looking at any.
As enterprise funds.
Yeah, as enterprise funds or any large increases in user fees in the end.
Okay.
There may need to be an increase in user fees, but hopefully we've planned it and positioned the city so we'll pay some of the costs with some of the reserves, but then also with the debt. Some of our debt that we do have what's called revenue fund debt, and that is in our sewer in particular. And so as we pay that down and we're facing that copper compliance, there's new debt coming on. So trying to structure that.
Sure.
I would look at it of how are we helping the general taxpayer in lowering their burden? Because I think the enterprise fund, we're going to be in good shape. It's property taxes I would suggest to you.
You had me at hello. All right, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, and that was on my list of questions too, but we won't slow down the night,
I
but
think we got like 2 years or a little more and then the sewer debt is paid off. It's in the book. I have to look.
yeah,
I saw it
it's
once.
in there. I saw it in there too. Thanks.
Fiscal
Thank you.
25 is the last year.
What's that?
Fiscal 25 is the last year.
Schedule real quick. Tonight we're doing introductions. Laura's going to go through A and B here shortly of tabs. Police department and library will go this evening. My goal is, what time is it? 6:30. I really would like to be done each of these work sessions about 8 o'clock. We'll have food every night here. But I think once we get past 8 o'clock, everyone gets tear-eyed. So that's my suggestion. On Wednesday, we'll have some outside organizations. One I've added is Highway 30 Coalition. It actually was a handout that was emailed and it was also on the dais about their request. It was in the budget. We just didn't get that out with the budget book last Monday. And then Public Works, that'll be the heavy lift on Wednesday. On the 31st, we'll have some more outside agencies, fire, building. We'll go through the administrative tabs and then kind of our overall other areas that are not any major department. On Wednesday, February 2nd, We'll have the last of the outside agencies. Park and Rec will be there. We did a little bit of the timing on that because we know we'll have the bids back on February 1st. I'm not asking you to make decisions on February 2nd, but obviously we know that that's impactful to the overall budget discussion and direction that we go. So we can have that discussion as part of that and really wrap up at that point. Certainly, we can look at, we have adoption now. We can certainly in February look at additional budget workshops if necessary. February 14th, we really would like to set a public hearing for the maximum levy. Now, once you set that maximum levy, that's the most a levy can go. It can go down, but it cannot go up at that point. So even if there's some additional discussions we need to have and we're still fine tuning some numbers, that can be okay. When we set that public hearing on the 14th, we know that that's the top threshold. We'd actually hold that public hearing on February 28th. So there'd be notice in the paper, we'd hold the public hearing, and then we, at that night, would set the public hearing for the fiscal year 2023 budget overall. And then we'd hold that public hearing and consider adoption on March 14th. Now, there is a little bit of room in there. We will have a meeting on March 28th of the council. Kind of pushes it up a little bit. We don't like that tight of March 31st. We must file it with the county auditor. So that's our suggestion, that we start kind of the hearing process and adoption on February 14th, hold the first public hearing on the max levy on February 28th, set the public hearing then for March 14th, and then hold the public hearing on the budget on the 14th of March. So that's a broad, big picture overview of the budget. I guess if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now, or we can go into the next part.
Well, I want to talk about, in your book, page 20 and 21.
Can you pull
I
that
like
up
this
on the
chart.
overhead?
I'm just going to give you some information that you can use as a council member to, if you have anybody talk to you about our tax rate and an evaluation also. What I like about this chart, a lot of the other charts don't have valuation in. This one does. So how you figure a factor, if you take like the Carroll, I'm on page 20. If you take 1966 divided by 140,000, you come up with a factor of 0.014. Now you can take that factor and go to any of the blue property values in this chart, and you can see what their property tax would be if they had the Carroll factor rate. Follow me on that?
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm just going to give you a couple. Denison, if you used our factor, they're showing $2,189. If you use the Carroll factor, it'd be $1,459. They pay 50% more in their property taxes per valuation than what the Carroll people do. So you can use it, Storm Lake, they're at 26, and if you use the Carroll factor, it's 1737. It's 51% more. So if you got anybody saying, our property taxes are high compared to other cities, you can use this evaluation. And you can use that and say, oh, this is what it would be if you had the Carroll tax rate. Now, if you want to go to the next one, which is city only, by the way, on that sheet there, Carroll had the best factor rate of. Now, if you do the next one, city only, the factor rate is 0.006, and you can get that by just dividing the tax rate by the. So in all those that I did before, Denison's city only, their tax rate is 64% more on city only. The only one in that group that has a better tax percentage-wise is Pella, our city only. Now, I'm going to pass this out. This is just some stuff that I do. You can get all these numbers on Iowa Department of Management. Pass those that way. You can tell I did a lot of pencil marking in there. These are just, I'll wait until everybody gets it. You can go to the Iowa Department of Management and it will give you the number one highest tax rate is Garden Grove, which is an extremely small town. Two, there's 942 towns in the state of Iowa. And if you look at in 2020, we are 878, number 878 on consolidated tax rate. They do not break it down by the city, the Department of Management. So you just got to kind of look on yourself on the right-hand side number, the 1160 in Carroll. That's a city rate. 2684 is consolidated school and DMAC and county and us. So you can see even the following year, we just moved 2 points. But the one thing you want to look, and then the next one that's closest to us in our size is Pella. And they're on the page before at 397. So really towns our size, and even, didn't you say, Mike, 5,000? This is 10,000 approximately.
I think it's 7,000.
Okay. There's nobody close to us. But now, again, this doesn't count in evaluation where the other one does. But the one thing you want to look at, if you go back to where the Carroll is 877, look at some of the, I just picked out towns of interest to us on the front page, our size and that. But what's interesting is the ones close to our number, Glidden, Lanesboro, Templeton, and that, they really kind of piggyback off of Carroll, our amenities. You know, they come to our town to use our amenities, and still we're at a very good tax rate. So you can go, they have not come out with the new numbers yet because everybody hasn't determined what their tax are. But this is just information for you guys, you know, that I've done to help explain to the public when they want questions answered.
Very good. Thank you, Laverne. Well, Mike, do we move on to I'm thinking while I'm talking, which is a scary notion, but
No, we'll wait until
we'll wait till he gets done with the IT stuff.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to do that. Oh,
I think you're next, but we'll find out. Do we move on to?
Yes. So
To
we'll
Brad?
look at, tab A and B.
Okay. Oh, no, Laura's going to do that, right?
Yep, we'll
Yep.
start it and
I'm
then
with you.
I think.
And we'll tag team a little bit.
Okay, I'm with you. Thank you.
So under tab A, the first thing is the city manager overview, which Mike, through his PowerPoint that he did, basically covered everything that he had in his cover memo, as well as he covered a lot of things in tab B. So we can possibly move through that a little bit quicker than maybe what we have in years past. But the other big thing under tab A is really the highlight, oh goodness, sorry, is our projected balances. When we budget to a balance of the
Page one.
page one. Yep, sorry, page one. We'll try to have it projected to on your screens here. So page one is the projected fund balances for the fiscal year ending June 30 of 2023. And then page two is, just to take a quick step back here, is the projected balances of our current fiscal year. So one of the things, one of the requirements of the state when we do our budgeting process is to re-estimate our current fiscal year. So we put into place our fiscal 22 budget a year ago. And as you can imagine, a lot of things have changed over these last 12 months. So when you're putting together your next year's budget, you take a look at where you're currently at. We've operated about half of the year, a little over the half of the year now, and you guesstimate we should have a better idea where we would end our fiscal 22 budget when we put this together, the re-estimate than we were a year ago when we tried to guess where we were going to end in fiscal 22.
And I would inject, if you look at any of the details in the back of the book, all of the expenses are through January 10th. So anything that was even expended at that council meeting, you didn't make any changes on the bill pay, thank you. So it's still right. But we assumed that those would get paid. So anything you're looking on actual expenditures is through January 10th.
Yes. So we try to guesstimate where we think we're going to end our current fiscal year, fiscal 22, because that then becomes our new starting point for putting our budget together for fiscal 23. On these different budgets, I will go through and just kind of explain just a little bit about each of the budgets or each of the funds to give you a little idea. So the general fund is our day-to-day operations. Police department, fire department, parks and rec, city office administration running the buildings here. Those are the main things. Think of it as the day-to-day operations of running the city. The hotel motel, it's a special tax that was put into place when somebody stays at a hotel. There's a 7% tax, and then the city gets that money to spend towards state codes. That 50% of it needs to be used for basically cultural, recreation type of activities. It's kind of a long, lengthy description of what they can be used for, but 50% needs to go towards that. And then the other 50% can be used towards anything council desires, any lawful purpose is the typical term you hear there. The electric franchise fee, it is a 1% collection on the electric bills. Instead of paying a 1% local option sales tax, you pay a 1% electric franchise fee that comes to the city that can be used for any lawful purpose. What's being proposed in this budget is to use some of those collections towards street projects. The federal grants, SR special revenue. So the electric franchise on up to general fund through electric franchise, technically for our reporting purposes, that's all going to fall under our category when you see the budget forms for the general fund. The federal grants through down here where it says crime prevention special projects, those funds are what we call special revenue funds. That's very unique in it is a special revenue, a certain specific type of revenue that you're going to collect and can only be used for a specific purpose. So for instance, the road use tax, special revenue road use tax funds, the city gets allocated to them from the state. That's the money the state collects from fuel taxes, car registrations are the main things. The state collects all that, distributes them out to all the cities and counties. You have to use those, so special type of income used for a special purpose, and the special purpose has to be road-related expenses. It cannot be used to pay for the lights here at City Hall. Has to be used for road-related expenses. It can be used for our snow removal, the wages it costs to have the employees move the snow. So it can be used for some type of wages of employees, but they have to be doing road-related work. They call the employee benefit special revenue, special type of tax collected to be used to pay for employee benefits, either in the general fund or the road use tax fund. Local option sales tax, we've talked a little bit about what that is and how we've used it in over the years, and we can dive. There is more detailed information in your budget binder in the inside cover that shows a little bit more about what we're using it for. And we can dive into that a little bit more when we get to that area of the budget. So once again, all those are special revenue, special kind of income used for a specific or special purpose. Debt service fund, that is the fund we use to pay for the principal and interest on debt that is outstanding. That's the only fund you can do that. All these that start with CP stands for capital projects. These are capital projects for different types of capital projects. These are typically the projects that tend to be multi-year, the bigger ones, at least probably $50,000 or more, or could be multiple revenue sources are paying for one big project. but we're talking the large things. We're not talking about day-to-day operations. We're talking about the streets, the buildings, things like that. Perpetual Care and the Rec Center Trust Permanent, these are two what we call permanent funds. They're like endowment funds. You maybe have heard in your world, your working world, different endowment funds, or your personal world endowment funds. Basically, when money gets deposited into those funds for one of two purposes, of the reasons why we have these two, you can't take the money back out. It's in there to grow, and interest accumulates on it. You can spend the interest off of it. That's typically what endowment funds are. You build up a balance, you earn interest, and you can spend the interest off for whatever purpose that you've set up the funds for. Perpetual Care has to do with the cemetery, and then the Rec Center Trust Fund Permanent would be improvements for the rec center. Then the Water Utility Fund down to the Stormwater Capital Improvement, the second to the bottom, those are all the funds that we call our enterprise funds. They are supported by user fees. They are not supported by tax collections. So if you're not generating enough revenue in these funds, the enterprise funds, you can't use taxes to pay for the operations. You need to adjust your user fees. And then the Medical Insurance Internal Service Fund, we talked about earlier how we've utilized this fund to help maintain and manage our health insurance costs so we don't see huge increases in going up and down. It's try to keep it more steady and smooth throughout time. That's kind of the fund that we set aside to help buffer if there's any huge increases in health insurance. Really broad on what types of funds we have. You'll see the balances, and we can talk and dive into more of those, and some of the departments do have those listed in their detail on where the balances are, maybe why they're on what balance they're at. The general fund we've talked about ending at, we've used here at the city for a number of years, and it's really tied to the debt service, or excuse me, Moody's ratings when we issue debt. Anybody have any questions about the different type of funds, or maybe any balances at this point where we're ending some of the balances? So page 1 is fiscal 23 information. Page 2 is fiscal 22 information. So that's the information under tab A. If there's no other questions, we'll proceed to tab B. Oh, food's here. Is this a good time to stop then?
I would say otherwise it could take probably another
Yeah.
45 minutes to go through B.
I'd say this would be a good time to stop.
You need a motion for a recess?
Yeah, I always see.
You need a motion?
We don't.
No,
We'll just recess.
I'll just note it in the minutes that we stopped at a certain point. So probably take 10, 15 minutes? Does that sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
Keep it to a half hour. Set out.
Because I'm like, something good. Okay. I did turn the mics back on. All right, if everybody is ready, we will go ahead and start discussing the information presented under tab B. So the first information starts on page 4 with the taxable valuation. So this is the information, or these are the numbers that we use to help determine what the levy, the proposed levy for the budget. You take your taxable valuation, apply the levy to come up with the tax dollars, which there is a couple pages in here that walks through that a little bit more. But what's key to note here is, well, let's take a step back and go, when I say step back, let's talk about information on page 5, the assessed valuation. So this is the starting point, basically for trying with this whole process, is you start with your assessed values of the property in your community. And that information is determined or set by the county assessor. The county assessor, and the assessed value is the best guess of a market to market, or what's that word? What's the long arms and length transaction of if you're selling your home or any type of property, how much would two parties agree upon a sale price? So that's the best guess of how much the property is worth in your community. And it's broken down by the different classes. There's residential, multi-residential, which multi-residential could be duplexes, apartment buildings, mixed use buildings where they might have commercial on the bottom and residential living on top. So that's considered multi-residential. Commercial, industrial, and all the other different classes. But the main ones that or the bigger areas is our residential, multi-residential, and commercial property. So we get that value of the market value of the property. The state says, due to different laws and rules that they put into place, we will roll back some of that value to get to your taxable valuation, which was on the page before, page 4. But on page 5, it does show that our assessed value, so the market value of our property over all the property classes in the city, did go up slightly at just a little over 1% in the city of Carroll from last year to this year. So that's just a little bit of an indication that property values are going up. There is growth. Things are happening. New buildings are being built. Not a huge amount, but there's something going on as opposed to it being a decrease. You apply the rollbacks, which Mike talked a little bit about the rollback to get to your taxable valuation, which is on page 4. The rollback for residential actually decreased from last year, what we call our fiscal 22 information. The rollback was 56.4% for residential property to this year's budget, or this fiscal 23 budget. The residential rollback is 54%. Mike alluded to in his memo that the legislative services of the state is indicating that they think the rollback for residential property will probably flatten out or stay fairly consistent around 55, 54, 56, kind of in that area over the next few years. And that all has to do that it's tied to egg value, and what is the egg values doing in your statewide, that's all statewide. So since the rollback went down, residential property tax valuation went down, as you can see in this page, that it went down 3.3%, or just over $11 million. So we have a little bit less value to work with than what we did the prior year, as we're trying to figure out how much or what to set the levy at to ask for the taxes. Multi-residential, that's a unique property class, kind of explained a little bit, but the state put that into place a few years ago, that they were taking these types of properties and rolling them back over an 8-year process, so that in the 8th year, it's going to be at the rate of residential property. It'll have a taxable valuation the same as residential, which that will be next year. We'll see. Right now, it's at 63.75%. It's going to go down roughly 7 to 8% next year, where it's only been going down 3.75% over these last few years, and it's going to really drop to get to that residential rate. So that'll be something that we'll have to try to overcome, if you want to call it that, next year, as we see what the value does for the multi-residential property. Commercial property, you can see some growth. So that means there's either revaluations going on, or there's more commercial property being built and put onto the tax rolls, because that rollback remained the same from last year to this year at 90%. At least at this point, we're not hearing that that's being changed. That was just changed a few years ago, that it rolled it back to 90%. And we're not hearing any indications at this point that that's looking to change, at least next year anyway. Some of the other smaller classes, they're not as big, so they're not going to have as much impact on our budget. But overall, the taxable valuation did go down slightly from last year at a little, about 1.5%. So just because the assessed value went up, but when you apply the rollbacks, the taxable valuation went down. And so we have to work through that, and how does that impact what we do with the levy? So that does impact what we do with the levy and how we come up with our tax asking for the next year. Does anybody have any questions overall what assessed taxable value means? So the next page, on page 6, just takes a 10-year history of what the residential property tax has done. Looking at the red bar is the assessed value, and the blue bar is the taxable value. So this is just one particular property class. As you can see, the red bar, the assessed value, is showing, for the most part, going up over those 10 years. So that means your community's growing, you're doing things, you're not dying off. Then when you apply the rollback, you can see the blue bar, for the most part, most generally has gone up over the 10 years. It looks like it's flattened out over the last 3 to 4 years. But once again, that's when you apply the rollback that's dictated by the state. That's what has happened to our taxable valuation for residential. So I would say overall, kind of the main message here is our residential property class is maintaining and staying strong, and we're not going backwards. We have that kind of slight increase constantly going up.
And I can only add here too a little bit, the flattening out of the residential the last few years, also probably a little bit attributable to our building permits being down. And so some of that value that we've seen in past years was more building permit activity.
The next page takes a look at the total taxable valuation. Instead of the page before was just the residential portion, just that one classification. Now we're taking a look at all of our classification together. The blue area of the bar is the taxable valuation that we use to apply most of the tax levies, because our overall levy is broken down by subcomponents. But then when you take the whole bar, that's used to figure out the debt service portion of our overall levy. But what this will show, the red part is what value we have in the tax increment urban renewal areas. That's like a whole nother discussion, so we won't get into a whole lot of that at this point. But what this is showing overall, as you can see that over the last 10 years, for the most part, our taxable valuation has been increasing. Yes, we've had some areas where it was pretty flat, or even actually this year it went down slightly. But most generally from fiscal 14 to fiscal 23, there's been that increase. There was quite a big jump from fiscal 14 to fiscal 15. That was due to a state equalization order. So every 2 years, the state does analysis and looks at actual property sales data in your county. And if the sales data is quite a bit off or differs from what your actual, or what you have your assessed values, they will come in and say, hey, you have to increase across the board or decrease. There are some decreases. You have to take all the property, and it's broken down by residential, commercial, ag, I think are the main ones. So they could come in and say, all your residential property across the board is going to go up X%, which we had. I think in that year it was 6% maybe on residential and like 32% on commercial, because the sales data that the state was collecting. So anytime there's a sales transaction that does get reported to the state, and the state will look at that, and they can come in and say, across the board, all your properties, or either like commercial, residential, you need to increase them. Doesn't matter what the property is actually doing. If you've left your house or a property, a residential property, kind of falter the other way, the state can come in and do that. So that year we did have quite a bit of an increase. This year is a state equalization order. We did not receive any adjustment. It was a 0%. So there are some of those. We've had some other smaller ones, a few percent here and there on a couple of the properties, but from 14 to 15, that was quite a large one.
And a note to make here too is, when the values for like the budget we're working on right now, they're based on 1/1 of 21 values. So there's nothing that will change value-wise at this point that will impact this budget. So it'll be future years at state equalization or this countywide reassessment process. It'll be future budget years. I mean, the values we have now are the values going forward in setting the budget.
So just a quick note then that you brought up the revaluation that the county is doing. So the county hired a firm to go and look at all the property, commercial, residential in Carroll County. They started with commercial property a few years ago. And so that has already been incorporated for a couple of years now. I don't remember for sure when, but all the commercial values have been revalued by this company and said this is the true, what they believe is the true market value of the commercial property countywide. They've already done the revaluation of the residential property in the rural areas, and those actually will put on into effect as of the 1/1/21 values. So this fiscal 23 values, or the fiscal 23 budget that the county's working on, those rural residential values are in place already. Now this company is working on doing the revaluation of the residential property within city limits, all the different cities in Carroll County. Those are set to be put into place and finalized with the 1/1/23 values, which would be our fiscal 25 budget. So a couple more budgets down the road, but I don't know what that will bring. It's hard to say. I don't know if the county has any speculation, but that company is working on, you maybe have already been contacted by that company and they've already been to your home. But that's what they're working on right now.
I think they're pretty much done with the city of Carroll, is my understanding.
Okay. So more to come with that. Hopefully good news, I guess. At least if nothing else, I think it just hopefully gives the residents this picture of this is truly what my home is valued at instead of some of a guess. And this process hasn't been done for 20, 30,
20 years.
20 years.
Mhm.
So it's not a bad time. A lot changes in 20 years, right?
And if you think about it, if your neighbor puts in granite countertops, for example, should I be taxed differently? Should I have the same value as my neighbor? So part of it is going in and trying to understand the condition of each home and trying to get that accurate valuation. So you're getting taxed based on what you really should get taxed on. And I think the county, a little bit, again, I think they're going to be facing with those value increases they had in residential, I would expect they would lower their levy rate overall. And when we face that, if we see a big increase with the revaluations, I would expect we would lower our levy rate. Again, we operate on dollars. Levy and levy rates are one component of the overall formula. But in the end of the day, we need a certain number of dollars to operate the operations of the city.
All right, any questions on taxable valuation, our trend over the last 10 years, where we think we might be headed?
Why do you think it's gonna go down in 22 and 23? What does it show that?
Okay, so that truly did go down. If that's not a projection, that was the information that we received from the county. And that has largely due to the residential rollback that was put into place. It was did you say a larger rollback? It went down more. Instead of being taxed at 56% in the prior year, your property will be taxed at 54%, a lower value. Any other questions on that taxable valuation?
And the rollback is viewed statewide. So it's a statewide look, but what they want to do is they say residential cannot increase more than 3% of value. And when it does, the state lowers the rollback. Now, in some parts of the state, if they've seen values increase 10%, the rollback doesn't impact them as much. In other communities like us, where we've seen our residential property values increase by 0.87%. The rollback caused us to have a negative 3.20% in our residential values. So it just kind of depends on what's happening in your local jurisdiction, what that impact is to you on that statewide calculation.
Okay, so the next three charts, we took a look at the taxable value and compared us to our peer communities. Our peer communities are communities of 8,000 to 12,000 in population based upon the 2020 census. And on page 8, this is the residential taxable value. So just one component of the overall taxable values. This is just the residential. Carroll is on the upper end, so we do have a nice residential taxable value overall compared to our peer communities. On the next page 9, this is the commercial and industrial, those two categories added together. And once again, we're on the upper end, only higher is Spencer, Pella, and Lamar's. And then the final one of the three is the total taxable valuation. So taking everything, not only the residential, the commercial, industrial, but the couple other smaller areas that are out there, railroad, gas and electric. And this, once again, we're actually in each one of these charts, we were the fourth from the top. So we've got a nice tax base, I would say, compared to the other communities, our peer communities to work with. I don't know, does anybody have any questions on, this is just, I know we always try to compare ourselves and how do we compare to other communities. This just shows that we've got a good tax work base to work, a good taxable value to work from.
One thing you can look at is like Spencer has more population. You look on page 8, but their taxable residential is less than us. So
Yes.
people in Carroll take good pride in their properties. And that's what increases the valuation.
Yes. Yep, so I didn't put in, or we don't have on here the actual population of each of the communities, just the range 8 to 12,000. But you're right, Spencer is population-wise a couple thousand more than us, or 12,000
Yeah.
something, I think.
Well, they have to be less than 12,000 or 11, like
Oh,
11,000.
11, yes, you're right, because we're good at 12,000, excuse me, you're right. All right, so now the next page, if there are no more other questions about taxable valuation, assessed value, we're kind of switching gears and talking about the different types of property taxes, or the different types of, the different components that make up the overall levy, the overall city levy. So on this page, it's just a narrative of the different components that we use, all with the exception of the emergency, that comes up with the overall city levy. The general fund levy, or the 810 levy, is basically for our day-to-day operations. A vast majority of the cities, 742 of them, do or are at the max of the 810 levy. So a lot of communities are utilizing the full amount. The next one, the emergency levy, you can levy up to an additional 27 cents to help with your day-to-day operations. Emergency levy is a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? Not a very good descriptive word. It doesn't mean it has to go towards emergency services. It just means it can be used, it's called the emergency levy, but used for day-to-day operations. It can be, and it helps fund your general fund operations. The employee benefit levy is just that. It's only used to pay for employee benefits. The FICA, other retirement systems, health insurance benefits. So you have to have expenses to show that the need for that type of levy. This one does not have a cap like the 810 levy. You can levy up to the amount necessary to cover your costs for that area. I would note that in this particular one, what the city of Carroll has done for a number of years, we have not been levying the total maximum amount that we believe we need for the expenses, that the general fund or some other fund is covering some of the expenses. Such as the enterprise funds can't be funded by the tax levy anyway, but general fund is covering some of these costs. Tort liability levy, this is for our property insurance, liability insurance, worker comp. And the city, this one, once again, does not have a cap like the 810 levy or the 27-cent emergency levy. You can levy the amount necessary to cover your expenses. We are not levying the full amount. So there is roughly 22,000, I believe, that's being covered by the general fund this fiscal year. Then the last one here that the city of Carroll uses is the debt service levy. This is only for principal and interest payments. Can't be used to levy to pay for any other expenses other than principal and interest of your debt. This one does not have a maximum. You can levy as much necessary to cover those obligations. It is worth noting that we do use some other types of funding to pay for our principal and interest, including local option sales tax happens to cover some of our debt service expense, as well as tax increment financing or TIF revenues and sewer user fees. As noted earlier, if the local option sales tax, I just think that was a startling number. If the local option sales tax goes away and we're no longer able to show that tax relief, it's 96 cents on the levy to cover our debt obligations. Does anybody have any questions about what any of these types of levy components are or how the city is using them? On the next page, we put it into actual numbers that shows what a history, a 10-year history, as well as what's being proposed in this budget of what the levy would be based upon what the law says, the different amounts of, if we're at a maximum, like the 810 is a maximum, or the amount that we're asking for to cover the expenses for the liability and property insurance or the employee benefits. As you can see here, it is an increase from last year or our current year that we're working under, the $11.65 to $12.14. You have anything to add on this, Mike? So this budget that's before you does incorporate the revenue, which on the next page takes these actual levy numbers and puts it into dollar amounts. So you can see how much money or how much tax is being asked for those different components to cover the expenses. It's a 10-year history. Now, the way this chart is broken up is to show that there was a change in the law a few years ago that we call the Senate File 634 that says we have to hold a separate hearing on what's called the maximum property tax rate. And the law says you hold a public hearing to cover your levies that are on, in essence, like the left half of the page, which excludes the debt service levy. But then when you hold your public hearing on your whole budget, then you get to include the whole levy and the whole tax asking. It's a little bit of, in my mind, confusion.
They did it in the name of transparency. And I think it did really add a lot of confusion. But I'm not a legislator.
It was what, 2 years ago they did that?
Yeah, I think this is our third year doing
Yeah.
this. So we'll need to hold a public hearing that says the taxes being asked are going up 1.89% based upon those levies that we're holding the public hearing on, which is just a portion of them. And then when we add in the debt service levy, it's showing that we're asking for a 3.09% increase over last year's numbers. But what this page does is it takes the actual levy, what we call the levy rate, applies it to our taxable valuation to get the amount of taxes that is being asked for to fund the city's operations for fiscal year 23. And this is across all the funds from debt service to our day-to-day operations. And again, this does not include user fees, the enterprise funds, because that's all separate. Any questions on the levy, the proposed levy, the taxes asked? So now we take that, and Mike has already talked about this on the next page, the impact that it has on residential property. So this page and the next page, one is, and remember, this is the impact it has based upon the city rate only. It does not take into account the consolidated rate because we don't know what the other taxing entities are doing right now. But it breaks it down by a home assessed at 4 different values, either 200,000, 150, 125, or 100,000. It runs through the taxing formula and how you figure out your taxes, and what type of an increase it looks like from your current year that we're in, which is the middle column, to what's being proposed with the levy that we just talked about 2 pages ago. It does factor in what the residential rollback has been for these 3 years that are shown here, and you can see it's gone up and down a little bit. And like Mike had said earlier, and we talked about this, that it's residential rollback that's driving down the taxable valuation, so that even though your the tax levy is going up a little bit, the rollback is driving down the residential taxable valuation, that it's a fairly flat, a slight decrease in the tax asking on a property from last year to this year. And so on page 14 is the residential side. On page 15, it's the impact that it has on commercial property. The commercial property is broken down by 4 different assessed values: 5 million, 2.5 million, $1 million, or 500,000, to show kind of the difference or what would happen. But since the rollback's not changing on any of them, the percent change on each one of those property values is going to be the same with the percent change. Anybody have any questions on the impact pages here for residential versus commercial property? This next page is a pie chart that shows, based on this proposed fiscal 23 budget, the revenue across all the funds broken down by the different categories that we basically reported in our budget forms. And broken down by you can see each category has a dollar amount tied to it as well as a percent. And then under that is a slight description on some types of the revenues that fall into that category. So your property tax asking is just over $6.4 million, which is about 23% of the pie. And that is the tax asking for the 810 levy, the tort liability, or our property insurance, the employee benefit levy, and the debt service levy. The big piece here, and we don't always have this, but this year there is quite a bit of debt proceeds that are factored in here for a couple big projects that are being proposed for Adams Street and the Rec Center building project. So the percent of each slice of the pie can shift from year to year depending on what types of revenue. We're always going to probably have property tax, TIF revenue, license and permits. The big one that really shifts the percent of each of the pie is how much debt proceeds are being proposed and what's going on each year. Another big area here I'll point out is the charges for services. So this does include the water fees and the sewer fees, because this is a depiction of the revenue across all of our funds, not just our day-to-day operations, but all the funds. So that would include the water and sewer or the enterprise funds, as well as we do collect memberships, which would be considered charges for services for the rec, golf, and the aquatic memberships. Does anybody have any questions about the different types of revenue in a city budget? The next chart here, pie chart, is if we took a home that's assessed at $200,000 in the city of Carroll and applied this year's current consolidated tax rate, and we broke it out, and this is the property tax bill that an individual pays, where are all the taxes going? So the county is receiving roughly just under 17% of your total tax bill. The school is receiving just under 36%. The city is receiving about 44%. And then some other small ones. DMAC gets a little slice, the state gets a little slice. But this just shows when you write out your property tax, if you write out a check, maybe some people escrow and the bank pays it for you, which is fine. Where does your property tax money go?
Is the assessor in there somewhere?
Yeah, it's in the county.
In the county
Yeah,
side
I
of it?
grouped it into the county.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because there's county and then there's, this-
Mhm.
yeah, the assessor.
Yeah, it could probably be broken out. It would be a small sliver.
Right.
A lot of people probably think counties.
It's like
this-
DMAC or some of the extensions
Yeah.
or some of the
Yeah.
smaller ones.
Yep.
I will tell you, my experience for the other new council members is this chart here is pretty beneficial because when people get their tax bill, they, for some reason, think it's all
Oh.
city.
Mhm.
I don't know why, but if you ever have to break it down, this is the pie chart you can show them. It really helps explain.
Any other questions? The next two charts we've kind of already touched upon when Mike talked earlier. This is the comparison of the consolidated on page 18 and on page 19 is the comparison of the city-only level levies of our peer group, that 8 to 12,000. The consolidated, again, Carroll is at the bottom. And then with the city, we move up just a little bit, but we're still in the bottom 5. The next two charts, Mike had also talked about these as well, and Laverne also brought up some information that gives that comparison or trying to place a value on those property taxes that you're paying for an average home in the city of Carroll, and trying to show you that it's a good value. We believe it's a good value of the property taxes that you're paying. So on page 20, again, this is the consolidated levy rate being applied to that average home value, and comparing it to our peer communities. And then on page 21, it's that city-only levy being applied to that average home value, then compared to the peer communities. Does anybody have any questions about that or thoughts on that information? We've already kind of touched on it, but if you had any other questions.
And no, these last two charts are newer charts for the city. And certainly if there is information you want or something you think would help as you're going through these, and maybe not even for this year, but even future years, we want to hear that. Certainly, we want to get the information council needs to make decisions. And so this was a request we had a few years ago that we put together. Certainly if there's other information you want to see, we're happy to put it together for you.
And the final page of this tab just shows the FTE of employees by department. So the top half of the page shows the full-time employees, as you can see over the last 4 years, last 3, and then what's being requested for this year, the same number of full-time employees. And then in the bottom half is the part-time equivalent of employees by the departments. So not much change. As you're going to hear probably from a lot of the departments, there's going to be a lot of business as usual. I don't think there's any major changes that are being proposed in any department. Major. Now there might be some minor things that'll happen and occur, but
So when we toured the City Works building garage down there, there was a guy that was short. Is that something that's going to be added?
So it was an authorized position. We just never had it filled.
so it's already incorporated into these numbers. yes.
Gotcha.
Any other questions? So that's the information that what I would call kind of the overview information of the city in tabs A and B. I'll just make a couple quick comments on tab C and D because we'll talk about them at a later date. Tab C does break down the capital project requests by the different departments, and each of the department will go into a little bit more detail about their capital requests. So starting basically on page 24 through page 28 is taking a look at by department, the current fiscal year 22 re-estimated, and then the request for 23. When we get into pages 29 through the end of the tab C is what we call our CIP, or our 5-year outlook on different projects that are coming up or that we'd like to take a look at doing at some point. But we won't get into a whole lot of that detail because, like I said, each department will go through their capital request in more detail.
One thing I interject on, starting on page 24, normally we haven't done a budget amendment yet. It's usually during this process that we'll set up and have our first budget amendment. Because of the debt issuance that we did earlier this year regarding the library city hall project, we've done a budget amendment. And so all of our capital items that were not completed at the end of fiscal year 2021 were then moved up and rolled into fiscal 2022. So this looks a little bit different than normal because there are some of those capital items that have already been moved up. What I would tell you, what's more typical is you would see at the end of this fiscal year, maybe something didn't get purchased or there was some capital item that still was still moving through the approval process. Those things will usually then carry forward in the next year. So a little bit different than what we'd see in typical years. And I think with, like, for example, car purchases, what are you being told on a delivery of a police vehicle now?
8 months.
Oh, yeah, 30 to 32 weeks probably.
So, I mean,
We'll
some of
order
those
as
things
soon
are just
as our
getting.
budget's done, we'll order for next year.
I,
car?
It depends. If it comes in sooner, just benefit.
yeah, and I don't, Randy could probably pipe in, but he doesn't have to, but I believe the medium duty trucks that we purchased for like snow removal, they're a year out plus right now. So just that stuff is getting just pushed back so much.
And then just a quick note on tab D for debt. We can talk more detail as we're wrapping up and later another night, but just to give a quick little overview, page 36. Let's see. Oh. Okay, something's not quite right here. I don't know why it's doing that way. But anyway, page 36 show the debt payments for the current debt that's outstanding, as well as the 2 proposed debts that we've talked about a little bit earlier, and what those payments look like going out for 10 years. And then about 2/3 down the way, you'll see a line that says debt service supported by annual levy. So that's the dollar amount that if the 2 debt issuances are approved and we go through that process, then those numbers would be the amount that we would ask for in the tax levy in the coming years. And then what's built into this year's tax asking is what's in fiscal 23 column right now. And then you can see the bottom 1/3 of the page is the debts supported by the user fees, which is what we call revenue debt. It does not get paid for by tax asking. It is paid for 100% by user fees.
So the top, that's general obligation. We issue that full faith and credit of the city of Carroll, and we have to levy to support those. Now, the general revenue debt, technically we could default on it. Now they'd be able to take the sewer treatment thing away from the city of Carroll, but the property taxpayers are not responsible for that revenue debt.
Wouldn't also be a local option sales tax would be a revenue debt, be an example of that or not?
Not necessarily, because you can do what's called a double barrel issuance that does get the full faith backing of geo credit that's being paid for by revenue. You get a better
Interest rate.
interest rate from that perspective.
Okay, so it cosigns.
It does.
Yeah, that's a good word for it, cosigns.
And we've done that with the fire station project, I believe.
Yes.
Very good.
And then the next page, this shows the calculation to get to our debt capacity, or that percent of debt that the city can have outstanding at any one time, that 5% debt limit, based upon the debt that we do have outstanding and then the two proposed that are in this budget, what that would look like going forward for the next 10 years. Which we can have a more in-depth conversation at debt on another time, but I just wanted to highlight a little bit about tab D tonight. So any questions so far?
So a revenue bond is just user fees then?
Yes.
I'm understanding that right. Okay. I thought local option did that. Okay. Very
I
good.
think you can issue local option that way. However, I believe most cities don't because you get the better interest rate by issuing it as a GO.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
And you could, for example, do like, it's not just water and sewer that could be revenue. I mean, you could do golf.
Oh, sure.
Rec
Rec center. Yeah. Anything that's got a
Yeah.
fee to it.
It's just, obviously you have more risk
Sure.
if you're just relying on revenue versus the full faith and credit of the city. You're going to get a better interest
Right.
rate because when you do a geo issuance, it doesn't matter what revenue, what dollars you have, the debt always has to be paid first.
Mhm.
Nothing else gets paid till your debt's paid.
I reserve the right to ask that 47 more
Okay.
times.
Good
I'll get it
Yeah.
through my thick skull. Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're ready. We could probably start moving into the departmental budgets then.
Okay, thank you.
Deputy Chief Burke?
The cover sheet, which I'll work mainly off of, starts on page 39 for the police department. Then I'll start with our general fund, which begins on page 88, if you want to, if you need to flip back and forth. Those are the two I'll be referencing. The accomplishments from last year, we replaced 2 squad cars, which is, we have a cycle that we replace cars. Usually one a year, every about 5 or 6 years, we do have a 2-car rotation that year. And then this last year we got an approval from our union to offer incentives for certified officers during our hiring process. We were able to get lucky and get an officer who was certified from the state of Colorado, which speeds up our training and our academy time quite significantly. And if you're in state, same thing. So we were able to get a good candidate from the state of Colorado that's on our staff now. We also sent one other officer to the academy. So we are currently at full staff with 15 full-time officers. We have 1 part-time officer who fills in perfect for us. And then we have a civilian person who does all of our admin work. Initiatives for next year, we have 1 squad car replacement. This will be more of our capital items. Looking at some upgrades for our handguns. And then there's a structure change for the payment for the communication center, which you guys are all probably aware of. We don't generate a ton of revenues for the city. Majority of it comes from miscellaneous revenues, which is our fines and fees, which is traffic tickets or surcharges from court, things like that get generated back to the city. The other larger one that we do generate is our licenses and permits, and most of that comes from liquor licenses, so beer or liquor permits account for most of that revenue. The other intergovernmental is some grants that we get from state and federal government. Our expenses this year, 89.3% of our expenses are personnel service. So that covers salaries, pensions, insurance, overtime, training, pretty much all personnel fees. And that's a large percent of our budget, which it always is every year. So right, 89.3% of the budget is that. Services and commodities is at 8.0% of our budget, $155,000. That is like vehicle maintenance, equipment maintenance, building maintenance, electrical, gas, phone costs, nuisance abatement costs, things like that. So that's what makes up our services and commodities. Our capital expenses this year are 2.6% of our budget, $50,000. That includes vehicle replacement. We have, every year we have about $6,500 for computer replacement, server replacement, things like that come up. And then this year we have the police equipment replacement, which is our handgun replacement with the trade-in value. So that's what makes up our capital expense in our general fund budget. Our total budget this year is $1.933 million. It's actually down from last year, and a large percentage of that is based off of 27 to 26 pay periods. And we had 2 vehicle replacement last year, which is a pretty big expense. So that's why our budget is a little bit lower than it was last year. I think if we would have had 26 pay periods last year, we probably see about an even break or maybe a little bit of an increase this year from last year. So I don't have those numbers worked out exactly, but that's pretty good projection to be about even, I think. So any questions on the general fund? It's pretty basic. A lot of it's set through union contracts, state codes, city policies. So on page 40, the first topic there is the communications, and the budget for communications is on page 93, if you would just want to look at that. We pay 1 quarter behind, so our 4th quarter payment will come out, I think we pay July or August for our 4th quarter of this current year. So the $150,000 payment for next year plus the 4th quarter of this year will be on the next year's budget. And then going forward, it'll be that $150,000 for the future until something changes. So that's why you see the total expense for the communications is $213,204. On tab F or page 94.
Can we pause for 1 second?
Yeah, go ahead.
One thing I was going to point out in the police general budget, if you go back and look at the detail, just under repair and maintenance of the building, it's a small thing, but was it $15,000 we budgeted for carpet replacement?
We did. We have 2 areas that get quite a bit of wear and tear. One of them at the administrative office area, another in our training room. And the carpet's it's 16 years old. Is that how old our building is now? So we cleaned it, kept it up as best we could, but it's at the end of life. So it needs to be replaced. We're going to make some change though. Currently it's just a layer of carpet. We're going to probably go to tiles like you see. I think this is probably tiles. So if we have damage or those high traffic areas, it'd be a lot easier to replace just those spots that have problems. So
And it was something we tried to budget for last year, just with budgeting, we weren't able to do it, but it's recommended to do it this year.
yeah, we got some major wear that's going on in there. So we'll get those fixed up and looking a lot better.
Sorry.
Nope, no problem. Tab F or page 94 is disaster services. Disaster services is our weather siren system. Majority of the cost is electrical fees. We do have some maintenance fees that we put in. We have to replace batteries every so often. It's a pretty small expense and a small increase from this year to next year, mainly due to electrical increases that we're expecting. The police forfeiture, which starts on page 203. This is money that is forfeited back to the city either through the court system or through it all comes from the court system, or the rest of the money that we have in our evidence under a certain amount that does go into our police forfeiture account. So this is all generated through money that's been forfeited during cases that we have. We have no major expenses that we're expecting out of that one. So you'll just see the fund kind of increase again this next year. Crime prevention is on page 205. And the major revenue that we see from this one is we do what's called vehicle inspections. So if a vehicle is given a salvage title, it has to be inspected before it can get registered in the state of Iowa. There's only certain agencies in the state that are authorized to do this, and we have guys that are trained to do it. So we do vehicle inspections for any total vehicle which has a salvage title, so they can get registered once they're back in working order. So we're checking for theft issues, so stolen parts, stolen vehicles, and we're also checking, make sure the vehicle is roadworthy. So that's where most of the money that comes in is for. We use this to pay for some of our DARE expenses. We have some crime prevention expenses that we help out with, and we also pay for our mobile data terminals, which are our computers in our car, for their Verizon service out of this account.
And you're a little concerned that this could go down with some changes that were made.
Last year, legislation made changes to the percent of damage on a vehicle to be considered totaled. So it went from, I believe, 60% or 50% up to 75%. So vehicle has to have 70% are totaled, which then required a salvage title. So currently, we have not seen the change. We average about 11 to 14 salvage vehicle inspections every month. And this law has gone into effect, and we have not seen a change yet. So I don't know if there's still cars that have been considered totaled prior to the law change that are still getting repaired and getting inspected, or if we're just seeing damage that extensive that they're still getting the total amount. So we could see a decrease in our revenue from that based off that new law change. So this next year, we're just going to see what happens and see where it goes and make changes for next year if we need to. So that was a law change last year that could affect some of our revenue in that area.
But you do that many of them a month.
We do.
How far out do these people come for that?
Yeah. I
Um,
noticed that too.
80 miles, probably the farthest.
Okay.
But we do get,
The closest station would be where maybe?
I couldn't even tell you.
Okay. Just,
Do they? There's a
what'd you say,
few.
Misty? Okay.
Denison at one point was doing it. I believe the officer that was certified there no longer is. You have to do so many vehicles every 2 years to keep your certification, and some of those small departments weren't doing it. We've been doing it as long as I can remember, as long as I've been with the department. So probably,
How do they find you? DOT directs them to you? Is that?
I think it's word of mouth. Yeah, there might be some on the website too, because everything is done through a DOT website as far as payment. So the money used to come to the city of Carroll, which no longer, that changed about 5 years ago, probably. Excuse me, now it goes to the state, and then we get reimbursed every quarter or month on this one. They're always a little different. Fines and fees are different, and this is different too.
Fines and fees are monthly. These come kind of as they're done,
Okay.
because I'm constantly seeing trickles of $40 come into our bank account
Yeah,
throughout the
man.
month.
How
Okay.
long you been doing them?
I'm going to guess 20 plus years.
Man, I did not know that.
I didn't know either.
Yes, I think it's been longer
Or-
than I've been here.
And we have a lot of people, there's a company in Vail that does a lot of cars that we see, a few in Denison. We got guys from Pocahontas, Storm Lake, everywhere. Templeton comes up randomly. So we get them, like I said, 80 miles, probably the farthest they come, but we get
And does the state legislature mandate what you can charge for it?
we don't set the fee, that's set by the DOT.
Set by the DOT?
Yes.
Yeah,
So the current fee is $60 and we get 50.
okay.
40, we get 40, okay. For every vehicle.
Something about an old dog and new tricks. Yeah, very interesting. Sorry, slowed you down.
Nope, not a problem at all. Let's see, crime prevention. The fund balance on that one, I think the auditor every year says we probably need to spend this down, projecting fund balance to be just over $39,000 for next year. So I expect the auditor will tell us we need to spend it again, and we may or may not. So sometimes it gets big. We have spent in the last few years. We did it, assisted with some vehicle replacements, equipment replacement, I think, last couple of years. So there is some limited areas that can be spent on. I don't believe it can be spent on salaries, benefits, that type of stuff. So usually it's equipment that we purchase. So when we do have big changes, we'll dip into that and help offset some of the costs.
So going back to an earlier conversation, what Brad just talked about, the fund, police forfeiture, and crime prevention, special revenue funds, special kind of income to use for a specific special purpose.
Page 41 on the department summary gives our personnel. Like I said, we have 16 full-time, 1 part-time, 15 of those are full-time officers. Just kind of a recap of the capital request for next year. We have an auto equipment replacement estimate at $31,985. That includes a trade-in of a vehicle. We have our, every year, our computer equipment software replacement that we use to replace any parts or any items that need replaced within a department. And then we have the $12,403 expected for police equipment replacement, which is our handgun replacement with a trade-in value for the current guns that we have.
We talked about using one of your trade-ins one time and not trading it in. Have we done that?
Yes.
We did. It just got traded or just got to the building department in December, I believe.
A couple months ago.
Is it what, SUV or?
Yes, yep, Ford Explorers.
And one of our hopes is with the vehicle that we brought over is like some of our out-of-town mileage, that we can reduce that and long-term hopefully save funding. So
I just didn't know if we've done that yet or not.
Sometimes the ones that we trade in aren't the best to keep around. So the last one was in really good shape and had decent miles on it. So it's a good car to have. So really that's my budget in a nutshell. I'll gladly answer any questions that anyone may have on it.
certainly in years past, as we go through the department budgets, it's usually the opportunity we really ask, is there things you want changed or not changed? Is it acceptable? Certainly we can go through some of that later on too. But going through it as we're working through the budget, it's helpful for staff to understand if there's no concerns, we can start making notes. I guess this would be a good opportunity to ask questions or make comments.
In the past, we used to have a K-9 cost. You don't have that here.
So that money, that special use fund was generated through donations. A couple high schoolers had a project they needed to do, and they raised $15,000 or $20,000 for us. And that money has all been expended at this point. So that fund has been closed out. It just holds a zero balance on it. So we don't budget any money for it just because we don't have any money in there. We've spent it down to the zero amount. And so now all of our K-9 costs just come out of our general fund. And the majority of that's training. Our big expenses are done. The dog is expensive, the equipment is expensive, and the high school kids raised all of that money to pay for both those items. So currently it's all just under our general fund for training expense.
What's the expectancy out of the dog?
Hopefully 10 years.
How many years do you have left with
7, 8.
Okay.
Yep, we'll kind of wait and see. And the goal is the car. So we try to trade cars about 100,000 miles. So the plan is with that car getting less, it's one officer's assigned to it, or other ones have multiple officers assigned to it. The goal is to, when the dog retires or if it dies, whatever happens, we can replace the car at that same time, because it's quite a overtaking to put the K-9 cages in them. So we'll have a big expense one time if we decide to replace the dog at that point, and hopefully we'll kind of all coincide together.
My next question would be, I know for a while the city of Carroll went without a K-9 dog. Would we plan to always keep that moving forward?
So far, as long as laws don't change, there's been changes with K-9s over the years. We have a great benefit that we see with our dog. So I would like to see it stay. If it's something where it gets to that point where there's some law changes where it just doesn't work anymore, obviously we'll make those changes and not use it. But currently it works. It has great benefits for us. For tracking is a big thing. Lost people use it for dementia. People have wandered off. We tracked. We had kids that ran from a beer party a few years back, about when it was negative 10 degrees out. Track them with that. They run out with no shoes, no shirt, or no clothes, or anything. So we tracked them with that. We use it for narcotics. And it gets a lot of PR stuff out there too. So it's got a great benefit, I think, for us. And the cost is, once the initial cost of the dog purchase is over, it really is a good benefit for the city.
I've experienced that a couple times. I've asked to be involved. One was at the schools, and then another one was just a traffic day. And if you really want to see the benefit of the dog, it's impressive to ride along and watch that dog work. When I was at the school, it was incredible how they found that.
He is. Yeah, the dog is great. This company that we use out of Sheraton, Iowa, that does all of our training and everything, recertifications. Our dog always researches in the top 2 every year, and he does really good. He's a good dog. We have a good K-9 team, I think, overall. So the handler does a good job with them, and the dog's well maintained and well trained too.
Any other questions for Brad? Going once?
Thank you.
Thank you too, Brad.
Thanks, Brad.
Thank you.
So we'll move now to Rachel. Is that correct?
Yep.
Hi, Rachel.
Hello,
Did you want to start with that, or are you?
I'm gonna start with this, if that's okay. Coming around to you will be the library's annual report. So in the annual report, I provided a variety of different charts. In here, I have included fiscal year 19, 20, and 21. It's been kind of strange at the library with a move to a temporary location back to the renovated building and then not able to open due to COVID. I also included some charts in here from comparable peer-sized communities, the same communities that are listed in the other charts in your budget book as well, to see where we fall. Again, they were in the same circumstances as us, so keep that in mind that some of these numbers are going to be a little abnormal. Okay, so we saw a dip from 19 to 20, but again, we're on our way up from 20. Downloadable use, that's our ebooks and audiobooks online. We saw a significant increase in that due to COVID. Database use is up as well. So overall, our physical and downloadable use is up. And then, of course, we were closed due to much of COVID and not having as many in-person programs. So we were down there, and also with attendance, of course. This does not account for any of the virtual programs that we did either. Our door count was down. And then our wireless use has gone up as well. So compared to our peers, we are kind of an outlier when it comes to physical circulation. Part of that could have been because we did a lot of curbside and we did a lot of outreach with Miss Diane. She delivers tons of books to daycares and like Head Start and so forth. And she continued that through when we were closed, which is very major. Overall, we kind of fall in the middle when it comes to our peers, which is not bad or good. We are kind of an outlier when it comes to our database use. I believe we have our archive online of our digital newspaper. I think we see big numbers there that can contribute to that. Total use, again, we were top compared to our peers. We kind of fell in the middle in regards to the total number of programs, in-person programming, and kind of the attendance, we fell in the middle as well. Door count, we were in the top 5 compared to our peers. In wireless use, we were at the bottom, but overall we saw an increase, which I think is good. So it's, again, kind of strange, and they had a variety of different factors in regards to their community and how they did things with COVID. So I can't quite say why their numbers were so high in regards to, specifically Sioux Center was brought to my attention. I don't know why they had such high door count, but they did. So if there's any questions, I'll just move on to the budget, which is on tab E, pages 48 and 49 of your budget. Under tab I is the more detailed library budget if you want to see that. And tab S is the library trust fund, which I wasn't going to go into too much detail about, but if you have any questions about that, I can certainly answer questions about that. So our fiscal 2023 initiatives include adding additional part-time staff member to be able to expand programs and services. We'll go over that more in detail later. And then upgrading computers, which I'll go into some more detail here. So our revenue, you'll see from the state appropriation that this last year we re-estimated our amount to be $8,377. And then this next year we're projecting $4,404. So the state appropriation, what it is we participate in a system called open access through the state library. And what that does is it allows a person who lives in Storm Lake to utilize the Carroll Public Library, and they're able to physically check out materials from us. And so we report to the state. I tell them how many circulations we have for every place out of Iowa. And we saw a 90% increase in just traffic and circulations and stuff. So we have people in surrounding area coming to utilize us. And so it has consistently been 4,000 in the past. And so we will see what this year, next fiscal year brings for that. But that's why that reestimate is so different than what we're projecting. So I hope we get the same number this next fiscal year, but I'll include it in my reestimate for next year. We get funding from the county. We also bring in money from the 7 smaller contracting cities within Carroll County. And miscellaneous revenues is just fines and fees that we bring in. Fees could be printing is a big one for us, and any just to cover any consumables that we have. We also, now moving on to expenses, Personnel services takes up a good portion of our budget. Services and commodities just includes our book budget, IT, utilities, those sorts of things. And then the capital outlay is where we plan for our computer upgrades. We have 4 computers that need replacing in this fiscal year. And then on to page 2, you'll see in fiscal year 2022 for authorized personnel, we're at 6.11. And then what we're requesting in fiscal year 2023 is 6.34. You'll see that additional part-time staff member we're asking for is in the library assistant position. And I have Thomas Parrish here from the Board of Trustees who will elaborate more on that if you want. If you want to come up.
Love to. Hey everyone, I don't have a big speech planned, but Rachel asked me to come. I'm the vice president of the Board of Trustees. I've been on the board for a little over 3 years now, and it's a 6-year term. We're finding that with different changes at the library, there are more requests for different programs, different services that we're right now with the staff that we do have. Rachel and all the people who work at the library are feeling like they're just needing a little bit more help than what the current staff is able to provide. And with some of those numbers she was going through and showing the utilization, especially with surrounding communities coming in and utilizing the space with all the different programs that we are offering now. They feel that if they could have another part-time staff, it would help to just be able to provide those services that maybe they're not able to fully fulfill right now. And she can maybe elaborate a little bit more on what specific services and maybe programs that they'd like to be able to be doing that with the current setup of staff that they have it's just limiting them a little bit. So that's kind of the gist of it. And are we, as far as part-time, like an average hour for something like for a weekly average, is that something that you have kind of an idea of or what you'd be asking for?
This person would be about 9 hours a week, but this wouldn't include any weekend hours, or excuse me. So this is 9 hours during Monday through Friday, and then they would alternate their weekends with another part-time staff member. So they would be working weekends as well.
And we're currently weekends, meaning Saturdays, but we do continue to field requests, and people do bring up Sunday hours, which we do not provide right now. That would be another thing that bringing in maybe another potential part-time staff would help with. And even a part-time staff to be able to be fully functional for those days where maybe, on a weekend where maybe not, there's not as many people there. As far as the staff goes, they still have to be fully trained and they have to go through, they've got to be able to do a lot of the circulation desk things. And if we want to look into doing more, possibly, expanded hours or Sunday hours, having that extra help would definitely make that a little bit more feasible, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So questions about that? And
One thing that intrigues me is if we increase 90% of our attendance on the outline farther away, like 20 miles and farther, or
We get people from West Side, Auburn, Audubon.
well,
are you talking those as part of your 90%, or you're talking farther out than that 90?
That's a majority of it, I would say, would be the West Side, Auburn, Audubon. It's more
Out of Carroll County.
out of Carroll County, yes.
not the ones that are in the township.
No,
that
this does
we're-
not count for anybody in Carroll County. This would be,
Curious why that would be. That's a big jump for 1 year.
mhm.
Yeah.
And
I-
the
Is it
libraries and
possibly the
planning
new
and-
library?
Well, that you got to wonder a little bit, just new library, up to date on all the, we have a maker space, we have different
Right. I will say,
options.
Okay, so since Glidden, Coon Rapids, and Manning do have their own library, they count as open access for us. Because like if it was somebody from Templeton, they already contract with us, so they do not count as open access. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So
Well,
Walk that through for me just for a minute, would you?
Okay.
The open access. So are you telling me that they actually utilize one of those other libraries, but it counts for us? No.
So somebody that lives in Manning could utilize Manning's library,
Mhm.
but they choose to utilize us. So yes, they would count as open access from Manning because they have their own library. So if I'm a Carroll resident and I go to Des Moines and sign up for a library card, they would count me as a Carroll resident. So when they report their numbers, they would report me as a Carroll resident.
Okay.
And
So
we get
yeah.
revenue from that, right?
Yes, we get $1.06 per transaction, and it fluctuates from year to year, but yes. And that comes from the state for participating in this service.
Yeah, that was that $4,400
Yes.
dollar line in
Yes.
that first
Mhm.
page. So it adds up, and it could very easily just be new library. The word is
Mhm.
out, and people are coming to utilize it more. But again, that kind of comes back to maybe why at times we feel like we need some extra help. You know,
And correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm a Manning resident, I come up here and grab a book,
Mhm.
I can return it to Manning and it still gets back to us.
Correct. We offer that
It's an
service.
interesting service from that perspective.
Mhm.
so anything as far as asking for a part-time staff, does anything else come up or any of the other questions as to why we're asking for this? And again, it has to come from a trustee, but obviously we have to factor in what we hear from Rachel and the staff that's in place to kind of go, they're there every day, dealing with this stuff. So,
Well, the board will, weigh out that Sunday thing with their due diligence, I'm sure.
right.
I have no idea what kind of demand you'd have on a Sunday. The rec center's open on a Sunday, pools are open on a Sunday, I get that, but I'm a Sunday guy, so.
The requests come and go, but all of a sudden you'll get a few in a row. And so we always kind of reopen the discussion and
So let me ask you this, how many libraries are open on Sundays? Can you get information from them, what their data is compared to what they were before they opened on Sundays?
And I have,
Rachel has a bunch of stuff compiled with that.
I can certainly submit that to you. I've
Mhm.
compiled all the information from peer-sized communities to see what that is, what their staffing looks like. I've collected data before COVID and after COVID, and their hours are kind of unclear right now. So, but I can certainly get that information to you guys. I have that all in an Excel sheet for you.
Are any of the other 3 county libraries open on Sunday? Manning, Glidden?
No, not that I'm
Rita?
aware of. They're, I think due to their size and staffing that they're not.
Do they tell you that they get demand for it or not?
Not that I've heard from them, but I can certainly reach out and ask
Oh,
them. but,
I'm just curious.
yeah, not that I've heard from them though.
Okay.
No.
Yeah, Rachel, she's pulled reports and it kind of seems split down the middle and it's just kind of community to community. But a lot of plus or minus a few thousand people sized towns there's some that do and some that don't. And if they are open on a Sunday, that might mean they're closed on a Thursday afternoon or, to try to make up for that. But it's all about, we've talked, do we try to get a survey out? Do we try to, feel things out a little bit? But there's kind of pros to cons to that too sometimes. And
I would assume, most people would, certainly the public would be receptive to it. Because
Right,
they just
yeah.
get another day.
Exactly.
But then and again,
Well, if we gotta make a
No,
decision,
I-
I would personally, I'd like to see data of other communities.
I
Yep.
think that would be good, but I consistently just kind of a drip, 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 have people asking me, do you think they'll ever be open? People are so
Right.
anxious to get going and doing things.
Right.
Will they ever have Sunday hours?
And that's, again, if this is something we really want to consider, having an extra person available. Nobody's going to love the idea of, oh, I have to work on a Sunday once a month now, or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So the more ways you can maybe spread that through the staffing that you have, probably the better.
My sense was people wanted a few hours on a Sunday afternoon,
Mhm.
something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be 8 to 5, but it might be
just
noon
even
to
to
4.
be able to
or
run in,
Yep.
just kind of.
take your kids there for
Right,
an hour,
right.
So
Exactly.
a lot of pros and cons, but that's again, if you have somebody else that can help fill those hours, that does make it more
Right,
feasible probably.
right.
And I will say other libraries are typically open 1 to 4 and
Sure, yeah.
yep, and they do it like September through May. They do it during the school year. So,
Yeah.
so
The other thing that popped out at me is our database usage. Extremely high.
yeah, I looked at the numbers again. I even had another library call me. She's like, how? What are you doing? And I'm like, this is what the numbers say. I will say I think our digital archive online of Daily Times Herald gets a lot of use of genealogy research. I mean, you do probably just searching in general, you have to do multiple searches and just sifting through it.
I
So
spend hours this
Mhm.
past year.
Well, and you said a lot of
Yeah.
that is pulled from like Google Archives. Is that
we have it hooked up to Google Analytics, which
analytics? Yeah.
is kind of confusing. And I've questioned, is it double counting? And I'm not an expert by any means how to set up Google Analytics. And I've asked other people and it's very confusing. So we've done our best.
Rachel, the data usage,
Mhm.
how are you determining it? Does it just tell you how much data you're using? Is that what you're going after?
Yeah, it's telling you like page views is probably the one I look at and
That's
stuff.
all from people just in the library using the computers, or is this wireless where that whole apartment complex right next to it could be using the city's data? Or
Oh, you're talking about wireless Wi-Fi. Yeah, so it extends out into our parking lot. So you could have people at all hours utilizing it, and it doesn't extend so far as the apartments. I hope not. Oh, you already checked. So that's a great service for people after hours to come pull up outside the library. We've had a lot of rural patrons that don't have the best Wi-Fi at home utilize our Wi-Fi just to download a movie.
That's what's a little confusing for me is our wireless usage is really low,
compared to, yeah.
but our database is extremely high. So it's got to be an internal usage.
So the database usage, you could be from at home utilizing it and not utilizing our Wi-Fi. Let me clarify that. So does that make sense? So like I could be in Kentucky
All right, got it.
looking it up on the internet.
That makes sense. All right.
So,
Thanks for the charts. That's
Oh, yeah, this is great.
easy to follow.
Thank you.
good. Glad to hear it. And I can get you that Sunday hour
Yeah,
information too.
well, if we got to make a decision,
Sure.
myself, I'd want those numbers.
Rachel, I'm just curious, 'cause
Yeah.
I've been in there several times, but
Mhm.
it's so big, I can never tell where everybody's at. So on any given day, do you have 6 people in the building? Or is it like some of these part-timers are there?
The part-timers are more there in the evening because that's when we need the most help. So usually we try to have 2 people at the circulation desk, and then you have the other staff members throughout the building doing whatever, or they're mostly at their desks. So, yes, they're just kind of all over. So I can go into more detail, I guess, if you wanted me to, but
No, I just was wondering if those, like, if you generally do have 6 people in the building most days.
not all 6, no.
How many would be required to be there to, say, extend the hours to a Sunday? How many would need to be in the building to make that happen?
I always make sure there's 2 staff in the building. And so we have 2 currently on Saturday. So it would be 2 on Sunday is what I would propose. And then our library page comes in who then reshelves the materials. So a 3rd person might be in the building that day to do that. So
And how many hours are you looking to do on the Sundays?
it would be like a 1 to 4, 1 to 5. So you need probably about a half hour before we open for opening tasks to get done. And then usually by the time we close, we have everything wrapped up and we can leave once the last person's out the door. So you would be looking at 3, 4, 4.5 hours the most.
Does the state library statistics have like what libraries are open on Sundays?
They do not.
I'm sitting here looking at it. I thought they did, but I'm not finding it. So
No, they don't.
Yeah, what you have pooled, you just call around and check around.
Yeah, and I
for the most
checked
part.
their website to see what hours they had and contacted them. So, yeah. But is there any additional questions?
Anything else? For Rachel or Dr. Parrish, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And thanks for your service too.
Yeah, no problem.
We appreciate it.
Are you doing a little bit more?
No, that's all.
Okay, well then I'll take off.
Okay. Thank you. Good night.
Yeah,
Well, are we pretty well to a close then for tonight, or is there any other business? Nobody
Yes, if
else?
there's any changes or other questions with the library?
I have none.
I was just gonna ask, the computers that you said you're repairing, are they ones that we just brought over from the old, like, we didn't put all new computers in when we.
Oh,
did the
no.
library?
Yep. Nope. We have them on a
rotation.
rotation. Yeah.
Would we do about every 5 years, maybe?
Yeah, but every 5 or 6, I have pushed them to 6. But sometimes they die sooner.
Mhm.
Are these your staff computers or are they public computers?
The ones I'm proposing are public computers. We do have the staff ones on a 5-year
Okay.
rotation too, as well. So we try to make it to 5, or sometimes I push them to 6. But
One thing about the library, people have commented, we put a lot of glass in there and that's not energy efficient. But I remember either Randy or you or somebody told me that our utility bills now for the current library are less than what it was when we had the library and City Hall together.
I don't know if we can say that right now with the way the energy prices have went, but I know
You
initially.
can go about the amount of usage.
Yeah, I know initially, just on dollars, this building in Farner was cheaper than when it was just Farner and the old HVAC systems. So,
I just have one other question. I'm just curious if you can share anything about what other programs you wanted to bring in. A little bit.
So we've talked, well, we have this new makerspace and we've been trying to ramp up our makerspace services. We thankfully have the ICU extension, and they've come in and done a lot of programs, but
they did a program today, didn't they?
they did with Legos and a zip line. So that was fun. But without them, I don't know how we would be doing programming in there. I foresee this part-time staff member heavily helping at the circulation desk to help a full-time staff member have more time to get their stuff done without being consistently interrupted, to help patrons. So it's just helping even that out a little bit and so forth. So, and we've had requests for like a computer, a senior citizen computer, how to use a computer. I'm like, okay, we got to figure that out. We've talked about bringing like a teen technology for parents program and stuff. So I'm kind of working on that. So, I mean, I kind of help out and do programming when I can, but it can be difficult sometimes. So. Mm-hmm.
Anything else? Are we at that time? Okay. Well, so thank you both of you for being here tonight, and see the rest of you Wednesday. And with that, we do need a motion to adjourn, correct? Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion in a second? Roll call?
Misty? Yes. JJ? Yes. Laverne?
Yes.
Kyle?
Yes.
Carol?
Yeah.
We are adjourned.
Thank you all.